1390 Questions and Answers. Zio had always been looking forward and uneasy as to what her mission was. She looked forward to it because she had already chosen to accept Mr. Fool's gift, so she definitely had to pay the corresponding price. Knowing the mission earlier allowed her to prevent unnecessary second-guessing due to the unknown, guesses that only led to greater fear. She was uneasy because she knew that the remuneration she received was too generous. She believed that the final mission wouldn't be simple and would definitely be filled with danger. At that moment, after hearing Mr. Fool's words, her heart finally settled. At the same time, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Investigating the 3-sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics and the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway and their locations, and even confirming the present state of the primordial demoness was indeed very dangerous. It was a mission that would result in a terrifying corruption if she wasn't careful, but it was at least better than snatching the uniqueness and sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics or directly facing the primordial demoness. If it were the latter, even with the official factions supporting her, Zio didn't think that she could accomplish it. All she could do was write a will, ready to sacrifice herself at any moment. And if it was just the former, she could use a more roundabout method to obtain the information. She didn't need to encounter powerful existences with high statuses. As a sequence 4 demigod, Zio was confident. Without any hesitation, she immediately replied, "Yes, Mr. Fool." The Fool Klein had planned on looking to the other side. After some consideration, he added, "Be careful of Bansi." Without waiting for the Tarot Club members to start making connections, Klein said to Leonard, "Your mission is similar to the Moon's. During the besiegement of the Rose School of Thought, gather blessings, auras, and items from the Mother Tree of Desire from their members. It's equally dangerous." He only gave a single warning without saying as much as he did like when he gave Emlyn the mission. This was because Leonard had a senior angel from the Marauder pathway parasitizing him. He knew many secrets and knew how dangerous the outer deities were. He wouldn't allow Leonard to act recklessly. Seeing that Leonard was about to nod, the Fool Klein maintained his tone and continued, "You don't have to do too much in promoting my name. You can even choose not to do it. As one of the 22 high-ranking members of the Church of Evernight, as one of the few high-ranking deacons of the Nighthawks, it was very easy for something to happen if Leonard spread the faith of the Fool in private. He would be misunderstood by his colleagues and cause unnecessary conflicts." Miraculously, to Klein, the Moon Emlyn's actions didn't seem to be misunderstood in the same way. To the people and Sanguine around him, anything he did wasn't too strange. That's right. Leonard had already recovered from his previous eagerness and realized the cruelty of reality. However, he still wanted to do something. At this moment, the Fool Klein added, "You can share the stories of the world with songs and poetry." Songs and poetry? Leonard instinctively frowned. He didn't immediately respond to Mr. Fool. Klein then said, "Other than that, try your best to raise your own level to prepare for the apocalypse. The reward for all the missions is a wish." Although many Beyonder characteristics had fallen into the real world when the god of combat died, bringing with them a batch of Beyonder creatures, mutated monsters, and abnormal lands, Klein didn't know how many sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics the Evernight goddess had obtained from the warrior pathway other than the uniqueness, but at the very least, a number of the sequence 2 angels of the Church of Evernight had the possibility of becoming a sequence 1 angel. At the same time, if they had obtained additional Beyonder characteristics, they could still switch to the corresponding sequence of the death pathway. This would open a path for the saints to advance, not limiting them to just one pathway. Of course, not every sequence 3 saint wished to become an angel, but Leonard was currently only a sequence 4 night watcher. Furthermore, if the corresponding sequence 3 horror bishop position was limited, he could consider Silver Knight and Ferryman. Klein had one set of the former. Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before he slowly exhaled. "Yes, Mr. Fool." The Fool Klein immediately cast his gaze at Miss Justice, who had been waiting. "Apart from promoting my name, you have 2 missions. One is to assist judgment and investigate the whereabouts of the Red Priest pathway's uniqueness and sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, confirming the present state of the primordial demoness. The other is to work hard to raise your level. One of the missions is to increase my sequence." Audrey was somewhat puzzled about this mission. In her opinion, this seemed to be telling an ordinary person, your mission is to earn even more money. Furthermore, this isn't of any value to Mr. Fool. Could it be that he wants me to treat Mr. World? Just as this thought flashed across Audrey's mind, the fool Klein added, the higher your sequence, the more opportunities you have to awaken the world. In this aspect, you can make use of external forces to help. The psychology alchemist that Hermes rebuilds will be one of the choices, but you need to be careful and take precautions. You have to pay a certain price for this. You can give up the reward you received before. This depends on your will and thoughts. Audrey no longer had any doubts. After a moment of silence, she nodded solemnly. Yes, Mr. Fool. Klein's gaze landed on Alger. You will know what your mission is in time to come. Klein had already foreseen the corresponding scene. Without waiting for Alger to speak, he continued, you can bring the sea god scepter, but during this period of time, all the prayers of the sea god believers will be transferred to the sun, directly pointing at me. Although Alger still couldn't accurately guess what his mission was, he already had a vague premonition. After a moment of thought, he replied in an upright manner, yes, Mr. Fool. Klein retracted his gaze and looked around before slowly saying, after this, on the first Monday afternoon of every month, you can still gather here, but there will be no convener. If you need to do a private, mini-discussion, pray in advance and wait for a response. At this point, the fool Klein closed his eyes and said, let us end today's gathering here. The Tarot Club members couldn't help but feel a baffling sense of sorrow. It was as though a grand ball was coming to an end. They stood up at the same time and solemnly bowed towards the end of the long, mottled table. Your will is our will. Klein waited until they finished speaking before he dispelled his control of them. He watched as the crimson starlight scattered and quickly fell. After staring at the scene for a few seconds, he conjured a yellowish parchment and a dark red fountain pen. After some thought, Klein simply wrote, Dear Mr. Azik, due to some complicated reasons, I might be sleeping for a long time. I'm sorry, but I might not be able to write a letter to you for a long time. With just that sentence, Klein stopped and made the pen disappear. Although he had conjured that piece of paper, with his current status, level, and strength, he could sustain it for more than 100 years, even if it was brought to the outside world. He closed his eyes again, summoned Azik's copper whistle, and blew it. At the same time, he released some of the restrictions that came from Sapphira Castle. The skeleton messenger appeared, and every bone in its body trembled intensely as if it would collapse at any moment. If not for the letter that Klein had handed over, it might have prostrated itself. After the skeleton messenger received the letter and left Sapphira Castle in a hurry, Klein rubbed his temples. This wasn't because the will of the celestial worthy had already escaped from his state of eternal slumber, nor was it because of the pain from maintaining his lucidity. It was just a habit. Klein slowly leaned back into his chair and sighed. On both sides of the long, mottled table, Justice Audrey, the hanged man Alger, the sun Derek, the magician Furs, the moon Emlyn, the hermit Catlia, the star Leonard, and Judgment Zio appeared in the order they joined the Tarot Club. But this time, they weren't real. They were only projections. They no longer appeared blurry, revealing their images from Klein's memory. Soon after, more figures appeared. They were a mature man with a receding hairline with deep eyes, a beautiful witch with blue eyeshadow and red blush, a middle-aged man with black hair mixed with silver hair, his voice unusually loud and sonorous, a woman in her late 40s with ear-length short hair, a youth that gamed on his phone while eating delicacies, a happy young lady who kept giggling, a civil servant who looked old than his age with a high hairline, a young girl dressed in an old-fashioned skirt who focused on machinery, a doll-like lady with a pale face, a teacher with soft facial features and bronze skin, a child licking on ice cream, a madam holding 4 heads, and an elder looking all serious at a bill. They either sat or stood, gathering beside the people they knew. In the flickering candlelight on the long table, they discussed different things, followed the music, and danced. Klein silently watched the lively scene as his expression gradually softened. After an unknown period of time, he stood up, passed through them, and walked into the depths of this space. Behind him, the figures, the candlelight, and the music faded away and disappeared. When he saw the strange door of light above the grayish-white cloud, Klein beckoned for the magic mirror, arose. At that moment, the transparent or opaque worms and insects that clustered together to form spherical lights in the strange door of light turned bluish-black. It was like a thick layer of fog that made one unable to see what was behind the door. After Klein arrived, he didn't immediately enter. He felt as though there was an extremely terrifying monster behind the door, waiting to devour him. He raised his head and looked at the transparent cocoons hanging above the door of light. He looked at the modern humans with different skin colors inside the cocoons. Closing his eyes to sense them, Klein raised his right hand and closed his 5 fingers. The cocoons cracked open as the people inside transformed into specks of light. They flew out of Sapphira Castle and landed in the real world, into the bodies of those who had just died. After doing this, Klein lowered his head and looked at the magic mirror in his hand. "Are you scared?" The aqueous light on the surface of the ancient silver mirror swirled and the pale words outlined itself, "No." In the next second, Rhodes raised his own question according to the rules, "Great Master, are you afraid?" The corners of Klein's mouth twitched. "Yes." With that said, he took a step forward with the magic mirror in hand and walked towards the bluish-black fog in the middle of the strange door of light, passing through it. His figure disappeared behind the door that had the unknown hidden behind. The cracked cocoons were still gently swaying. Chapter 1391. Facing I. In the dark blue waves that seemed to never stop in the berserk sea, the future was like a leaf, being thrown high up at times and smacking down at other times. In these waters, there were still some pirate ships that were cruising. They were used to such situations and felt that it was as natural as the sun rising. After Katlia returned to the real world, she pondered for a moment before spreading open a piece of paper and writing. She wanted to ask the Queen what happened recently. In fact, before Mr. Fool announced that he would enter deep sleep, Katlia had already sensed the impending monumental change. Whether it was the sudden closing of the doors or the meteor shower streaking across the sky to illuminate the world, it gave her some inspiration as a clairvoyant, allowing her to see some blurry visions. Of course, she was limited by her own level, position, and status. She didn't have enough knowledge of what had happened, and she was unable to grasp what exactly had caused Mr. Fool to choose to sleep. All she could do was ask Queen Mystic Bernadette, who had long advanced to the level of an angel and led a mysterious organization while being in control of many powerful sealed artifacts. Just as Katlia summoned the messenger and took out the letter she had written, she was taken aback. At that moment, a purple light was accentuated in her eyes. It became extremely saturated and slowly flowed like a river. She felt that Mr. Fool had entered a deep sleep. Unconcealable hesitation, confusion, and sadness arose in the Admiral of Star's heart. For some reason, she felt an inexplicable palpitation, and 2 drops of tears unknowingly slid down her face. She seemed to understand something, yet nothing. She only knew that it was unknown how much time it would take for Mr. Fool to wake up from his slumber. Taking off the heavy glasses on her nose bridge, Katlia wiped the corners of her eyes, allowing her emotions to return to normal. She walked to the window and looked at the deck. Frank Lee warmly invited the crew to taste his newly brewed beer, but none of the pirates dared to try it. Thankfully, I sent Sealf to the Queen ahead of time. Now, all I need to do is watch over Frank. Without Mr. Fool's watch, I have to be more careful and pay more attention to him. Yes, I have to find something for Frank to do other than research. He's a first mate, so he can't always be working on something else. Katlia thought with a heavy expression. After considering how to deal with Frank, as well as how to reorganize the small number of pirates from the Earth and Moon pathway onto other ships, and not frequently interact with Frank, Katlia focused her focus on the Hidden Sage. Although she was already one of the 10 pillars of the Moses ascetic order, due to her background and the influence of the Hidden Sage, she had never received the trust of the president and the other higher-ups. She could only be an ostracized person who teetered on the periphery of the organization, who had her own circle and respective faction. From a certain perspective, her relationship with the Moses ascetic order was closer to that of a partner. On the one hand, she needed a faction and a powerhouse to project her will over the 5 seas. On the other hand, she yearned to obtain corresponding knowledge and materials, and to obtain the information regarding the hidden sage that represented a deity suddenly coming to life and confirming his current state would necessarily require her to become a core member of the Moses ascetic order. With my present identity, there's no problem with me participating in the internal decisions of the Moses ascetic order. Only by truly participating in these will I be able to come into contact with more information and elevate my own status. However, this will be rather dangerous. Even if the hidden sage's condition isn't right and doesn't interfere with the Moses ascetic order's operations, the other higher-ups will also be subjected to the infringement of interests and be in constant suspicion. They will counterattack to a certain degree. There are at least 2 of the 10 pillars that I can't see through, making me instinctively feel danger. And confirming the state of the hidden sage will be even more dangerous. If anything goes wrong, I'll immediately be corrupted and eroded by him. The more Katlia thought about it, the more she felt that the mission given by Mr. Fool was difficult. She had always been teetering at the periphery of the Moses ascetic order with her identity as a pirate. In fact, she had her worries about this matter. She was afraid that if she went too deep into the organization's internal affairs, it would expose the fact that she was still in contact with Queen Mystic. She was afraid that the other 10 pillars would one day suddenly point her out as a spy and eliminate her on the spot. At that moment, Katlia even wanted to abandon Mr. Fool's mission and identity as one of the 10 pillars of the Moses ascetic order. She wished to return to the dawn and returned to the Queen's side. That way, she wouldn't need to worry about this matter anymore. If there were any problems, the Queen would be able to stop them. Ever since she left the dawn, she had to shoulder everything by herself. Katlia had always felt exhausted as her shoulders remained heavy. However, this thought was quickly given up by Katlia. She sighed softly. She understood that she would never be able to return to the time when she was a little girl without worries. She wasn't only responsible for her own life, but also the fate of Frank, Heath, Nina, and the other crew members. Furthermore, she had predicted the arrival of the apocalypse. She hoped that she could become the Queen's most powerful helper and do something for this world. Katlia closed her eyes and muttered to herself, "Then face it." To truly integrate into the Moses ascetic order and gather the relevant information. After making this decision, Katlia no longer concealed her strength. She raised her hands and used a fairy tale magic. In the eyes of the surrounding pirate ship crew, the future and its fleet became illusory at the same time, turning into countless bubbles. The bubbles reflected a dreamy color under the light's illumination. Then, they slowly melted into the sea. Just like that, the future and its fleet disappeared from everyone's eyes. Many knowledgeable pirates were first shocked and stunned. Then they had a thought. A new queen over the seas has been born. Queen of Stars. Backlund in a particular house. Zio, who had yet to sort out her thoughts after returning to the real world, saw Furza's figure appear in front of her as she shouted, "That mission of yours is too dangerous." Zio was taken aback as she instinctively pointed out a problem. "You didn't knock." This was the worst part of living together with a demigod of the apprentice pathway. Furs first reflected on herself for a second before confidently saying, "You didn't close the door." She pointed at the ajar bedroom door. "I actually didn't close the door. That's right. This was a last-minute gathering. I wasn't prepared for it before the matter." Zio opened her mouth, but she couldn't say a word. Both of them looked at each other speechlessly for a long time, but none of them broke the silence. Finally, Furs decided to forget the accusation and focused on the mission itself. A mission that involves sequence 1 and a uniqueness is too dangerous. With that said, she recalled that Zio had already accepted Mr. Fool's gift. Her eyes reddened uncontrollably as she couldn't help but mumble, "Remember to get my help. At the very least, I can help you escape." To them, the things they experienced before had involved very few matters at the sequence 1 level. Apart from Mr. Fool and the world Gehrman Sparrow, at most it was them being watched by he who must not beat. At other times, they would at most do trivial matters at the periphery of corresponding matters. They had never faced an enemy that could be addressed as him. Therefore, when she thought of how her friend's mission involved sequence one beyond her characteristic, or even a uniqueness and true deity, Furs couldn't help but feel nervous and worried. Zio smiled and said, "I'm just seeking clues and investigating the truth. It's not like I need to face them directly." She paused for a second and said, "The apocalypse is approaching. We have to do something. Look, even Mr. Fool has fallen into a deep sleep. What's more, trivial figures like us. If I didn't quickly become a demigod, perhaps there's nothing I can do. But there's at least some hope. At the very least, I can try to awaken Mr. Fool." Furs had experienced many things and had long understood this principle. She had only been venting her emotions, but now she had calmed down. She thought for a moment and said, "What are you going to do next?" "Just relying on myself to investigate it will definitely be very difficult. I'll definitely need to use MI9's intelligence network. I plan on finding a suitable opportunity to let them know that I'm a sequence 4 demigod. In order to not be suspected, I might need Miss Justice to give me some hints and make some arrangements," Zio answered seriously. Furz's thoughts raced. "I'll come up with a script for you. I'll act as an antagonist and simulate a lunatic who attempted to advance to sequence 4 imperative mage and then be defeated by you." As she spoke, a story took form. She immediately sat beside Zio's desk, took out a pen and paper, and started writing. "After I write up the story, I'll get Miss Justice to make some amendments and make it appear reasonable," Furs said as she wrote. As a secret sorcerer, there was no doubt that she could prevent their conversation from leaking out. Zio thought for a moment and said, "Isn't your most important task now to write the biographies and stories?" That's simple. I've already thought of plenty of scenes, and there's a lot of material on my mind." "No, nothing of that sort." After muttering a few words, Furs placed all her focus on writing a script for Zio so as to gain MI9's approval. Seeing her good friend focused on her matter, a smile gradually appeared on Zio's face. She then cast her gaze to the ajar door and heard her brother, Dio Dericha, seemingly reciting the ancient Fasak words. This was a requirement for studying law to become a lawyer. Their mother was instructing 2 servants to clean up the living room. Their voices reached Zio's ears, and her expression gradually became firm. Although she had no idea what would happen when she faced the MI9 brass, and even though she would encounter unknown dangers when completing Mr. Fool's mission, as well as the unknown future during the dawn of the apocalypse, Zio knew that if she didn't do anything or take on certain risks and just enjoyed the pleasant times with her family just like that, she would ultimately be drowned by the floods like most people who were unprepared. And now, there was at least a path filled with brambles, one that had a glimmer of light at the end of it. It needed the realization of sacrifice, and to grasp it with courage. Chapter 1392. Yesterday, no more in a room beside the Evernight Cathedral in the southern continent, East Balam, Leonard's consciousness returned to the real world. After a few seconds of silence, he picked up the cup of coffee that had turned cold and took a sip. The bitter taste filled his mouth, gradually waking his mind up. "Old man, what happened today?" Finally, Leonard couldn't help but ask. After a moment of silence, Palez Zoroast replied wistfully, "Error has perished." Leonard almost didn't realize which existence Old Man was referring to. In the next second, he couldn't hide his astonishment as he nearly forgot to whisper, "Amon." This was a standard true god. Yes. Palez Zoroast's voice sounded like it had aged considerably. To be precise, Amon's main body perished. Leonard wasn't in the mood to distinguish the subtle meaning behind Old Man's words. He asked in disbelief, Was there no sign of it? He had witnessed the phenomena before and after the god of combat died. He knew that it was a change that would affect the entire world and bring about many terrifying monsters and dangerous regions. And just now, the only 2 abnormalities were the doors and windows suddenly closing and him seemingly forgetting something. In reality, the latter wasn't strange at all. Most people would encounter something similar during their daily lives. Palez Zoroast's tone sank. He should have perished in Sapphira Castle. Sapphira Castle? Leonard was shocked. The venue of the gathering he had just attended was inside Sapphira Castle. A war between gods has just erupted there? Amon actually infiltrated Sapphira Castle? Amidst Leonard's thoughts, his expression gradually turned solemn. Old man, Mr. Fool was injured because of this and had no choice but to enter a state of slumber? Is he about to enter a state of slumber? Pallas Zoroast asked in return. He didn't seem to be too surprised about this. Leonard tersely acknowledged. The reason he summoned us today was because of this matter. Pallas Zoroast fell silent for a few seconds before saying, his choice to enter a state of slumber is indeed related to the previous battle of gods and Amon's infiltration, but it's not because of injuries, but because of corruption. Corruption? Leonard blurted out in surprise. Even at Mr. Fool's level, irreversible corruption can still be encountered by him. Pallas Zoroast regained his previous poignant tone. Everything has godhood. By relying on godhood to become a powerhouse, one can never escape the shackles of godhood. On this point it's the same for you and me. Likewise for the fool. Perhaps he shouldn't be called fool. He is equivalent to half a lord of the mysteries. Lord of the mysteries. Regarding the problem of the mental imprint in a beyonder characteristic, Leonard indeed had a deeper understanding of it than demigods at his level. However, he still had several holes in the knowledge on this matter. Even though he had heard Old Man mention the term Lord of the Mysteries, he didn't understand what it meant. However, at present, he could confirm that Mr. Fool's level had transcended sequence 0 according to Mr. Fool's words during the gathering, and what Old Man had just said, his strength was enough to kill a true god. Leonard cleverly didn't probe further. He changed the topic in a deep voice. Old Man, why is Klein sleeping as well? Are you able to wake him up as soon as possible? Pallas Zoroast's tone was somewhat odd. How could an old and weak angel like me know about matters at the level of gods? As for the awakening, even the fool has no better solution, much less me? Leonard remained silent for a moment. He picked up his coffee cup and took another sip. After a while, he asked hesitantly, Old Man, do you have any way of stealing the artistic flair of others? Pallas Zoroast scoffed. The definition of artistic flair is vague with no clear categorization. There's no way to steal it. However, if you change it to natural talent, there's a way. Forget it. Leonard ultimately couldn't do anything about stealing the natural talent of others to help him resolve his problem. Pallas Zoroast added with a smile, if you can't accept this method, then you can find a natural talent that you want of someone who's very poor. Make a deal with him and give him the money he wants to exchange for the corresponding natural talent. It's a little like a deal with the devil, Leonard commented objectively. Pallas Zoroast chuckled and said, there's another simple solution. That is to spend money to hire naturally talented people to help you resolve the corresponding problems. Old Man, why didn't you say so earlier? Leonard instantly saw hope. Pallas Zoroast scoffed. You didn't manage to think of something that simple? I thought you had eliminated this option before consulting me. Leonard ignored Old Man's mockery. After some serious thought, he felt that this idea was indeed feasible. However, he soon felt a little guilty and uneasy, as if he was avoiding his responsibility. Regarding this matter, I still have to do something personally. Apart from inviting someone to write songs and poems, I have to write a little. With this in mind, Leonard suddenly stood up and walked to the door. Where are you going? Pallas Zoroast asked in surprise. Leonard frowned slightly as he said firmly, I'm going to the nearby bookstore to buy some poem anthologies. Ever since he advanced to Nightmare, he had given up the collection of poems he had bought in the past, making most of them nothing but decorations. When he became a spirit warlock, he began to collect poem anthologies that were suitable for some spirits to read, allowing him to chant the appropriate parts in a battle to create beyonder effects that worked in concert with him. Therefore, when he came to the southern continent, he didn't bring a single poem anthology book. He only remembered a few of those that he often used in the past. I never expected that, after becoming a high-ranking deacon, I would need to read poem anthologies again. Leonard sighed inwardly as his steps became firmer. Pallas Zoroast had never imagined that Leonard's next step would be to buy poem anthologies. After a while, he probed, "Is this an order from the fool?" "Yes, for promoting the corresponding legendary stories," Leonard answered simply as he opened the door and walked out. Pallas Zoroast fell silent once again before saying, "Apart from writing poems, you have to pay more attention to the besiegement of the Rose School of Thought." Leonard walked down the stairs and entered the streets. He looked at the pedestrians and nodded gently. Yes. At that moment, as he walked towards the bookstore, he felt as though he had returned to Tingen, back to the time when he was still a midnight poet. At that time, he had also walked along the bustling streets, preparing to buy a copy of Classical Poems Anthology of the Lone Kingdom and Selected Poems of Roselle. Backlund at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. After Emlyn White regained his senses, he found himself standing in front of a window. The sun was already dim outside, and the flowers were flourishing. His feelings towards Mr. Fool's slumber were slightly different from the other Tarot Club members. Other than heaviness, poignancy, sadness, and confusion, there was also the confidence that things would end well. Internally within the Sanguine, some of the marquises and earls were rather old. Even though they lived longer than most demigods at the same level, they were still in advanced stages of their lives. At this time, they often chose to sleep and use similar methods to extend their lifespans. The effects were pretty good. Therefore, Emlyn had long been accustomed to matters regarding slumbers. He knew that it wasn't equivalent to passing away, nor was it equivalent to perishing. He believed that if the correct solution was found, Mr. Fool would have a high chance of waking up. He looked out the window and muttered to himself, "Mr. Fool has entered a state of slumber, and the ancestor's revelation is often interfered with. It's obvious that she can't provide help frequently." After a brief silence, Emlyn sighed silently. "Indeed. In the end, I have to face it myself and bear it. This is the destiny of the Messiah." At the mention of the word Messiah, Emlyn clearly smiled with a self-deprecating hint. He then repeated inwardly, "I can only rely on myself." Just as this thought flashed through his mind, Father Yutravsky's voice sounded behind Emlyn. "Time to set off." Emlyn turned his head and saw a huge sword on the back of the priest dressed in brown priest robes. The sword's length exceeded Emlyn's height, and its width was close to his waist. Together with Father Yutravsky's hill-like body, the terrifying pressure felt corporeal. As a sanguine earl, Emlyn recovered from his stifled feeling and nodded gently. Okay. Today, they would head to the southern continent to participate in the besiegement of the Rose School of Thought. Just as he replied, Emlyn suddenly recalled something and hurriedly said, "Wait for half a day." He wanted to gather most of the Sanguine in Backlund to discuss the pharmaceutical company. Bishop Yutravsky didn't ask anything and nodded. "Come find me when you're ready." After watching Father Yutravsky enter the depths of the cathedral, Emlyn turned his head to the Sanguine that were following him to the southern continent. "Inform all the Sanguine in Backlund to come over. There's something we need to discuss." "Yes, Lord Earl," the Sanguine replied respectfully. After they split up, Emlyn turned his head to look at the altar and the sacred emblem of life in front of the cathedral. It was a simply drawn infant that was surrounded by symbols like wheat, flowers, spring water, and other symbols. This made Emlyn's thoughts suddenly turn adrift. He had forgotten when he started spending less time in his bedroom, spending less time with his dolls. Even his hobby of studying history became more targeted and efficient. This change didn't take form in an instant. Instead, it was slowly formed over time. It was something that made it difficult for others to notice. By the time Emlyn discovered it, he had already adapted to this new life. Emlyn retracted his gaze, raised his chin slightly, and shook his head with a smile. This is the destiny of the Messiah. Chapter 1393, where the dream begins after returning to the real world. Alger patiently waited for the mission Mr. Fool had mentioned. On this day he, wearing the pontiff's clothes and the silver-black mask, was discussing the internal affairs of the Church of the Sea God with Oracle Danitz when he suddenly saw a bishop enter. "Your Holiness, the Church of Storms has sent 2 gifts to congratulate you on becoming a proxy of God." The bishop held a tin box and bowed respectfully. Danitz, who had been secretly rejoicing over the malfunction of Byam's telegram, blurted out in surprise, "Where's that messenger?" "He left after leaving the present," the bishop at the door answered helplessly. Although the members of the Church of Storms often had impulsive moments, such behavior was still quite rare. Alger nodded slightly and said, "If they don't view us as enemies, sending a messenger to deliver a gift is enough." With that said, he raised his right hand and gently made the tin box in the bishop's hand fly over. After catching the small box, Alger's actions suddenly slowed down as though he found it heavy. He slowly opened the container and saw a book made of yellowish-brown goatskin. On the surface of the book, there was a line of words written in Elven, "Book of Calamity." Book of Calamity? After seeing the words clearly, Alger felt a little dazed as though he was dreaming. But very quickly, he understood what the mission Mr. Fool was talking about was. Alger sighed silently and looked at the bishop at the door. "What's the second gift?" "It's a ghost ship called the Blue Avenger. It has already moored at the harbor," the bishop answered without any abnormalities. "The Blue Avenger." When Danitz heard the name, he instinctively cast his gaze at the pontiff, Alger. He remembered very clearly that this was the ship Alger used back when he was a pirate. This meant that the Church of the Lord of Storms knew that the pontiff Church of the Sea God was once their cardinal. Is this a congratulation gift, or a challenge to war? As Danitz's heart tightened, he realized that he was rather familiar with the other gift. It was the extremely sinister Book of Calamity he had seen when he followed Gehrman Sparrow. "Help me return a letter to the Church of Storms, and thank them for their gifts," Alger composed himself as he calmly instructed. After the bishop left the room, he turned to Danitz and said, "Oracle, I've received Mr. Fool's revelation. I'll have to complete a mission in the time to come. It will perhaps take me a few years before I return." "A revelation?" Danitz blurted out in surprise. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. "Why don't I know about this?" Alger nodded. "Mr. Fool is about to enter a deep slumber. However, this will not affect responses to your prayers." Danitz was so shocked that he couldn't speak. Alger continued, "Gehrman Sparrow has also entered a state of slumber. After I leave, the church's matters will be handed over to Elder Derek Berg of the New City of Silver. You need to cooperate with him and write into the Bible that the Sea God is Mr. Fool and get all believers to accept it. Our faith is key to Mr. Fool's awakening. You are his oracle, and you have to make an example in this aspect. Of course, he will give you a new revelation at any time and give you other missions." Danitz was a little dizzy and confused when he heard that, but he still understood the seriousness of the matter. He hesitated for a moment before nodding heavily. "Okay." After settling the matter, Alger stood up and returned to his room with the Book of Calamity. He looked at himself in the mirror and laughed. He slowly removed the papal tiara from his head and removed the silver-black mask on his face. A few days later, at the crowded Byam harbor, Alger raised his head and looked at Derek, who was taller than him, and said with a smile, "You've been doing very well recently. The Church of the Sea God has been running smoothly." Derek subconsciously wanted to raise his hand to scratch the back of his head, but he ultimately held back. He said with some melancholy and reluctance, "Mr. Hanged, Your Holiness Wilson, when will you return?" Alger shook his head and said, "Everything ahead is still uncertain. No one can tell." Without waiting for Derek Berg to respond, he said, "You're already mature and reliable. I don't have any advice for you." Having said that, Alger paused before saying, "If the Rørsted Archipelago encounters a disaster you cannot stop, don't sacrifice yourself in order to protect it." Ah! Derek was stunned. This was the most important place of worship for Mr. Fool. It was the new home of the City of Silver, so how could he give up just like that? Alger had already expected Derek's reaction and explained with a serious expression, "To Mr. Fool, the most important thing is the believers here, not these islands. To the City of Silver, the most important thing is the people, not the city. As long as you can protect Mr. Fool's believers and protect the citizens of the City of Silver, migrating them away in time. Even if we lose Byam, the new City of Silver, and the Rørsted Archipelago, we can rebuild a new city elsewhere and rebuild a new home. Remember, don't lose sight of the forest for the trees. Derek was deeply moved when he heard that. He grasped the crux of the problem. He replied sincerely, I understand. Thank you, Mr. Hanged. Your Holiness Wilson. I will protect Mr. Fool's believers and the citizens well. Alger didn't say a word as he turned around and walked towards the Blue Avenger that was moored at the dock. The ghost ship was a three-masted sailboat that was still behind the present era, no different from before. Alger looked at it and looked at the crew members on the deck. He suddenly felt something and looked down at himself. He was wearing a linen shirt, brown jacket, and trendy pantaloons. He had a custom-made belt around his waist. Attached to it were a dagger and a scepter made of bone. The corners of Alger's lips curled up as he took a step forward and landed on the deck of the Blue Avenger. He then turned his head to look at the boundless blue sea, raised his right hand and said in a deep voice, Set sail. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey sat on a comfortable sofa and watched her father, Earl Hall, her brothers, Hibbert and Alfred, discuss the recent developments of the kingdom. She watched as her mother Lady Caitlin constantly convened the butler and footmen to make final preparations for the ball. She didn't say a word. She wore a faint smile as she quietly observed this common scene in her daily life. After some time, Earl Hall smiled and looked over. What is our little princess thinking about? Audrey pursed her lips and replied with a faint smile, Guess. I'm guessing you're thinking about which dress you'll be wearing today, and what kind of hair and makeup you'll be matching it with, Hibbert said casually on behalf of his father. Audrey smiled and said, Correct, but there are no rewards. She slowly stood up and said to her parents and brothers, I'm going upstairs to change into my gown. Earl Hall smiled and nodded. There's no hurry. Everyone believes that you're worth the wait. Audrey bit her lower lip and maintained her smile as she walked towards the door. When she was about to leave the room, she paused and looked back. Her parents and her two brothers continued with their discussion or arrangements. Audrey's gaze froze as she slowly retracted her gaze. She walked out of the room and went upstairs to the bedroom. Susie was already waiting there. Audrey inhaled indiscernibly and raised her right hand. She used her index finger to draw lines of faint light. They seemed to come from the deepest part of a dreamscape. A few seconds later, the faint glow turned into a blonde, green-eyed, abnormally beautiful girl, Audrey Hall. But unlike Audrey, this girl still carried a little childishness and a slight romantic bearing. Good evening, Miss Justice, the girl greeted her cheerfully. Audrey smiled and replied, Good evening, Miss Audrey. After the last-minute tarot gathering, she finally made up her mind to advance to Dreamweaver and prepared to split an identity to accompany her family. She would stay away from them and not let the various dangerous matters she had attracted affect them. After staring at her for 2 seconds, she turned to look at the golden retriever beside her and said, Susie, are you sure you want to follow me? Yes, we are friends forever, Susie replied seriously. Audrey didn't say another word. She split off a virtual person and entered Susie's body of heart and mind, which she opened up for Audrey. Then, she raised her hand again and outlined another Susie in midair. The moment Susie formed, she opened her mouth and let out a woof. Audrey retracted her gaze and looked at herself. After a moment of silence, although she knew that their thoughts and ideas were synced, she couldn't help but say to the blonde girl in front of her, I'll leave it to you in the future. Remember to wheedle to father often and get him to not be so busy. He's not young anymore, so he needs to be mindful of his health. He can hand over many things to Hibbert and Alfred or the butlers. Also, slowly counsel mother and tell her that she doesn't have to pay too much attention to the opinions of others. She doesn't have to maintain a perfect image at social events. It would be very tiring. Yes, don't forget about Hibbert. Cheer him up often and don't let him be so gloomy. He shouldn't complicate matters too much from overthinking things. Alfred won't threaten his position. Alfred, he needs a good wife to stop him from taking any more risks. Oh, why are you crying? We've already grown up. We can't be little girls anymore. Audrey lowered her eyes slightly and smiled at her crying self. I know. After Audrey said that, she pursed her lips tightly and nodded heavily with a sad expression. Audrey retracted her gaze, picked up her cloak, and draped it over her. Then she led Susie out of the bedroom and into the corridor. The hall below was lit with lights, and the guests came one after another to attend the ball. Lord Hall, Lady Caitlin, Hibbert, and Alfred were already at the door. Audrey stood behind the railing and watched silently for a while. She then lifted the ends of her skirt and slowly and solemnly bowed to her parents and brother from a distance away. After maintaining such a posture for 2 seconds, she straightened her body and raised the hood from her dark blue cloak to cover her face. To her side, behind her, there were bright lights and a bustling din. In front of her, many dark lights formed a sea of collective subconscious. "Let's go," Audrey said hoarsely to Susie. With that said, she walked into the dark, illusory sea. Audrey rushed out from the bedroom and cried out with a sobbing tone, "You must come back." Audrey didn't turn back. She raised her right hand and waved it, indicating that she understood. The figure wearing a blue cloak gradually disappeared into the distance amidst the deep, silent darkness. Chapter 1394. A new journey. In a room of an abandoned castle, sunlight shone through the gaps in the thick curtains, illuminating a pitch-black coffin. Suddenly, the lid of the coffin creaked and slowly moved to the side. With a thud, it fell to the ground. A few seconds later, Isaac Eggers sat up, looking rather lost. At that moment, he was wearing loose pajamas that had been popular in Lone years ago. He resembled a noble who had woken up in his manor. After a while, Isaac narrowed his eyes slightly. He looked around in confusion as though he didn't know who he was. He then saw the brilliant sunlight that penetrated through the cracks and saw the dust dancing in the sunlight. He saw letters scattered on the table, ground, and coffin lid around him. They were like giant snowflakes that blanketed half the area. Isaac got out of the coffin. With a puzzled expression, he bent down to pick up a letter and began reading. As he read, the confusion on his face disappeared a little, as if he had remembered many things from the past. Isaac immediately found a chair and sat down, allowing all the letters to fly in front of him to stack up like a mountain. He opened the letters one by one, reading them one after another. There would be pauses in between as he fell deep in thought, as if he was seriously recalling something. The sunlight that passed through the gap in the curtains gradually dimmed. After a long time, it shone inside again. At that moment, Isaac finally finished reading all the letters and completed the long contemplations that resembled cogitation. He looked at the letters that had been stacked on the table and slowly let out a long sigh. Following that, he took out a piece of paper, a fountain pen, and some ink that he could still use. He wrote with a warm expression, "I've already woken up and received all your letters. They made me recall who I am and who you are. I also remember many memories of the past. Your experiences, no matter how complicated and exciting, have exceeded my imagination. It also makes me understand some of the problems that previously plagued me. I can feel your joy, your exhaustion, your faith in life, and the heavy responsibility that you have borne from your letters. I can roughly guess why you ultimately made that choice. If it were me, I might not even be able to make such a decision. From the beginning, you've been a guardian. You mimicked others until you were mimicked by others. Next, I will begin a journey to pursue the past and witness the changes in this world. You seem to still be asleep, but it doesn't matter. I'll write to tell you about the interesting things that I've encountered, the interesting traditions, and interesting people. I think I should be able to send these letters to you via sacrifice." The tip of the golden pen reflected the sunlight as it rustled on the white piece of paper, continuously penning down more content. Backlund, in a solarium of a terrace house. Melissa walked in with a girl who was clearly less than 10 years old. "Aunt Melissa, why here?" the little girl asked, puzzled. "All the stories I heard had mysterious rituals held in the basement." With her hair tied up, the bespectacled Melissa smiled and said, "Those are unconventional mysticism rituals." She pointed at the altar that had been set up and the unlit candles and said, "You may begin." "Really?" The little girl tilted her head to look at the bright sunshine outside the window. "Do we need to draw the curtains?" "There's no need. It's pretty good this way." After Melissa answered, She smiled at the little girl while she awkwardly mimicked her usual method of holding rituals in a clumsy and unfamiliar manner. During this process, she would instruct her from time to time and even personally help her to complete the pre-ritual preparations. "All right, repeat after me." Melissa took a deep breath as her expression gradually turned staid. "Yes, yes." The little girl tried her best to appear stern. Melissa looked at the candle flames on the altar for a few seconds before slowly reciting in ancient Hermes, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era, de pool that done belong to dis ella." The little girl had never learned ancient Hermes before. Although she tried her best to imitate her aunt, she still didn't know what she was saying. "The mysterious ruler above the gray fog." Melissa continued reciting. "De mesterwies luler apove the gray pog." The little girl recited in all seriousness. "The king of yellow and black who wields good luck." After Melissa finished reciting, the candle at the end didn't wait for the little girl to imitate her. It immediately burgeoned to the size of a human head. In the large flame, a slippery tentacle with a somewhat sinister pattern extended out in an indiscernible manner. It was extremely slow. The little girl was stunned. She retreated and hid behind her aunt. Melissa pursed her lips and said with a gentle smile, "Don't be afraid, go greet him." The little girl timidly poked her head out from behind her aunt and saw the terrifying, slimy tentacle gently swaying in the brilliant sunlight that shone through the windows. It seemed to be attempting to swat away the dust or was waving at her. "Go, don't be afraid," Melissa repeated. The little girl finally mustered her courage and stood in front of the altar. She recited the incantations she had just invented before revealing a sincere smile and raised her palm. The slippery tentacle whose patterns had disappeared paused for a few seconds. It seemed hesitant and somewhat out of practice. Then, it raised its head and curled up slightly, lowering itself inch by inch. Amidst the sunlight, it high-fived that tiny palm. The end. Chapter 1395 An Ordinary Person's Daily Life 1/8. You have a chance to meet His Holiness. Barton heard a man in a dark blue bishop robe say to him. No matter how hard he tried, the other man's face was indiscernible. It felt like his face was covered with a gray, blurry gas. Of course, this wasn't an important matter. As a devout believer of the Lord, it was definitely the greatest honor for Barton to meet a proxy of Him. This made him so excited that he couldn't say a word. His body trembled as he followed the bishop to the back, entering the hall one step at a time. Barton couldn't describe the hall in detail either. He only knew that it was very grand and magnificent, one that exuded an immense pressure. He could only bow his head obediently. Finally, he arrived in front of the steps. At that moment, he seemed to receive permission as he subconsciously raised his head. Then he saw a golden retriever. This dog wore a deep blue, gorgeous robe that resembled a curtain. It wore a papal tiara with many gems embedded in it. It sat on a huge throne and watched him quietly. Barton was stunned. This is the pontiff? Barton was shocked and panicked, a strong sense of fear rising in his heart. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw the morning light illuminating the ceiling. Barton sat up, panting slightly, trying to extricate himself from the influences of the dream as quickly as possible. What happened? His wife sensed something amiss and got up. Barton shook his head. A nightmare. He didn't tell his wife the truth. He dreamed that the pontiff was a golden retriever. He could bet that his wife would say in horror, "How can you have such sacrilegious thoughts?" If that were to happen, he could only shrug his shoulders and say, "Just kidding. I can't bring my troubles into my family life. This is a paradise for humans, meant for relaxing." Moreover, women can hardly understand more profound questions. They have traits in being perceptive to thoughts and love. Barton didn't dwell on the contents of his dream anymore. He got out of bed and went to the bathroom to brush his teeth. After breakfast, he kissed his wife and children before leaving his residence and taking a trackless public carriage to the working district at the edge of the city. He was under the employment of the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation with a sizable salary. In places like the capital of East Chester County, Stone City, he was considered to be upper middle class. On the way, Barton studied the streets outside out of boredom. Due to not being directly affected by the war, Stone City still retained its former prosperity. Carriages, bicycles, pedestrians, and wild dogs came and went. It was lively and noisy. Barton was already used to such a scene. He didn't have much of an impression of it, but the dream from last night made him uncomfortable every time he saw a dog on the street. It was as if it was the incarnation of the pontiff, one that he needed to bow to and greet. "Holy Lord of Storms, please forgive your penitent servant." Barton raised his right hand, clenched his fist, and gently struck his left chest. After a while, he arrived at the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. As he greeted his colleagues, he walked into his office. After hanging up his hat and coat, Barton relaxed and leisurely prepared some special black tea for himself. He was almost middle-aged, and his energy was dropping. He always hoped to use a simpler method to supplement his body without suffering any hardship. After preparing the black tea, Barton picked up a few newspapers on the desk and wanted to prep himself before starting work. The economic situation in Backlund last season has greatly improved. Another pirate at the level of king has appeared in the Sonia Sea and the Berserk Sea, Queen of Stars. Desi Bay Fruits Trade Fair. After reading the newspaper slowly, Barton took a sip of black tea and started his work. A letter from Vernal? Barton found a letter from an old friend as he examined the documents on his table. He was an archaeologist who had a close relationship with the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. Barton immediately took out a letter cutter, took out the letter, and read it seriously. "My dear friend, my students and I found some interesting ruins in the mountains of Civilaus County. Perhaps they originated from refugees from the Fourth Epoch? In that period of history that we don't know much about, they left the city for reasons unbeknown to us. They entered the forests and stopped interacting with the outside world again. They existed in the form of a tribe. They might still be guarding something, but it has long been drowned out by time, leaving behind only ruins and corpses. My students and I will excavate this place while employing conservation practices. We hope to find something more useful that can help us restore the history of the Fourth Epoch. I wonder if your foundation is interested in this. Here, I solemnly invite you to send a team over to confirm if our work is real and effective." Going into the mountains. The first thing that surfaced in Barton's mind was not the relics or the history, but the buzzing mosquitoes, the humid, dark environment, and the camp that became a temptation to the wild beasts. He shook his head and picked up a pen and paper. He prepared to file this letter and send it to his superiors. Chapter 1396 In Ordinary Person's Daily Life, February 8th. After drafting the document's header, Barton was preparing to add some details into the document when he realized that Vernal hadn't submitted any supporting information. Does he think that he can apply for funding with just a letter by simply relying on his relationship with the foundation? Barton looked around the table and muttered to himself in puzzlement. In his opinion, Vernal wasn't an arrogant archaeologist. Apart from being feisty and impatient, he was considered a typical lone gentleman in all other aspects. Under normal circumstances, when one requested funding from the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation, they had to provide a lot of information, such as photos, ancient supplementary documents, and other related information other than a cover letter that described the project. Otherwise, the foundation wouldn't be able to do a review and make a decision, much less spend large amounts of gold pounds to send a team to the project location for inspection. Or rather, could it be that Vernal was just too careless and forgot to send the information out as well? Of course, with the relationship between Vernal and the foundation, it's entirely possible the upper management will send a person or two to arrange a meeting to verify the information when they see it. Yes, as a friend, I should still help him. Barton shook his head and didn't think further. He stood up and walked to the bookshelf. He then stretched out his right palm and used his fingers to stroke the back of a book's spine, selecting the information he needed. Finally, he took out a few books and journals, and combined his various viewpoints to give a detailed description of the history of the Civilaus mountain range in the document he was about to submit. In the scientific community, there's a common viewpoint. In a period that's unknown to be long or short, the Solomon Empire and the Tudor dynasty coexisted in the northern continent, and their border could very likely be situated where the Hornacis mountain range and the Fanapotter Highlands are today. There's a high chance that the Hornacis mountain range's extension in Civilouse County was a contested ground between both parties. Barton didn't endorse Vernal. He only provided references to show that there were indeed possible ruins of the fourth epoch in the mountains of Civilouse County. This way, if it was proven that Vernal was lying, no one would hold him responsible because all of the descriptions came from famous historians. Barton had only extracted snippets in a selective fashion. At the end of the document, he listed out his references: Private Historical Research of Civilouse County, Isaac Eggers, Koei University's Department of History lecturer. After completing this document, Barton read through it from top to bottom and modified his choice of words and certain sentences. Then he took the draft and entered the clerk's room next door. He asked them to type up a formal document with mechanical typewriters. The Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation had always hired plenty of female employees. From the lowest level of ordinary clerks to the deputy director of the upper echelons, at least half of them were female. Barton actually had some things to say about this, but he didn't, nor did he dare to object. He could only choose to accept the state of things. Of course, he had to admit that when he needed to wait, it was quite nice watching these young female clerks busying themselves. At least it enriches the colors here. As Barton listened to the tapping sounds, he mumbled silently. Once the documents were done, he signed and submitted them. Then, just like before, he continued with his work as usual. This included but wasn't limited to the trial projects, providing professional opinions and gathering research materials for the Foundation's papers and commentary. A day quickly passed, and Barton left the company at 6 in the evening. He took a public carriage and returned home after an hour. This was a common occurrence in all the major cities in Lone. That was why high tea became a trend. After lunchtime from 12 to 1, it would be 7:30 or 8 in the evening before people reached home. If not for high tea sessions, most people would definitely be abnormally hungry. Of course, this was only limited to the middle class and above. Many poor people might only eat 2 meals a day. Moreover, couples with the conditions to work would both be working. They would have to prepare dinner after returning home at around 8 in the evening. And the food wasn't for their enjoyment. Vernal came to visit you in the afternoon, Barton's wife said casually as she helped him take off his coat and hat. Vernal? Barton was taken aback momentarily. The archaeologist who discovered a fourth epoch ruins in Civilouse County had returned to Eastchester County? As soon as he said that, Barton frowned and muttered to himself, he really did forget to send the information, so he came back personally? No, there's no need to go through so much trouble. The Royal Mail is rather reliable. Besides, he should know that I'll definitely be at the Foundation if it's not a weekend. Yes, I might have been sent elsewhere for an inspection review. With this in mind, Barton asked, "Where is he?" "He only waited in your study for 15 minutes before he left," Barton's wife said. Barton pressed, "Did he say which hotel he's living in? When will he come again?" The archaeologist, Vernal, was from Eastchester County, but he wasn't a Stone resident. He didn't have a place here. He didn't say. He seemed to be in a hurry. Barton's wife paused for a moment before continuing. He looked very impatient. Barton touched his receding hairline and nodded gently. "I'll be in the study." His study was on the second floor, and there were many bookshelves and some porcelain placed there. He wasn't too passionate about porcelain, but he actively searched for unique items. After some searching, Barton didn't find any note or letter left behind by Vernal. He quickly threw the matter to the back of his mind. This was his usual rule. He tried not to be troubled by work once he got home. After dinner, he shared a beautiful time with his wife and children, then quickly washed up and went to bed. In the dead of night, he suddenly woke up and opened his eyes. Ever since the danger he encountered during an archaeological excavation 10 years ago, Barton had gained a sense of awareness, spiritual perception, that exceeded what ordinary people had. He could always sense some movements that others couldn't detect. For example, others might realize that someone was looking for them when visitors arrived at the door, but Barton could sense whether the other party was related to him once they walked down the corridor. Someone sneaked in. Barton suddenly sat up, his eyes wide open. He looked at his wife who was sleeping soundly beside him and didn't wake her up. With very slight movements, he flipped out of bed and removed the double-barreled hunting rifle hanging on the wall. After grabbing the rifle, he gently opened the door and looked down the corridor. This place was shrouded in the darkness of the night, and a faint crimson glow outlined certain objects. Barton didn't hesitate. He entered the corridor and scanned the area. However, he didn't find the burglar. Was I mistaken? Barton turned around, feeling a lack of confidence. There was no sign of any of the rooms on the second floor being opened. After thinking for a while, Barton came to the door of the study, grabbed the handle, and gently twisted it. The door opened silently. Everything inside was immersed in the darkness, resembling all kinds of monsters. After drawing the curtains, Barton carefully examined the interior with the aid of the moonlight, and he confirmed that the interior was exactly the same as he remembered. I really am too sensitive. An after-effect of the nightmare yesterday? Barton exhaled and left the study quickly. Behind him, the curtains that were drawn lightly swayed, as if a gust of wind was blowing. The next day, Barton continued his daily routine. He kissed his wife and children, took a rental carriage, read newspapers, brewed black tea, read letters. There's another letter from Vernal. Barton felt relieved and opened the letter. However, there was nothing in the letter. The sender seemed to have forgotten to stuff the letter into the envelope. Has Vernal been suffering from absent-mindedness recently? Barton glanced at the envelope in his hand and suddenly realized that the pattern on it was a little strange. This was an envelope with a commemorative sense. According to what Barton knew, many high-end hotels in Backlund and Stone City would provide special envelopes and paper to their guests. It was equivalent to a tourist souvenir. Which hotel is this? Barton put the envelope to his nose and prepared to smell the fragrance on it. It was also unique and recognizable. In the next second, he smelled a faint scent of blood. Chapter 1397 In Ordinary Person's Daily Life, 3/8. Instantly, Barton's hair stood on end. Although he couldn't be sure that he smelled blood, his spiritual perception told him that this was the smell of blood. Vernal encountered some misfortune? Just like the archaeological team that I was in back then? No, there's no blood on the envelope. How can it emit the smell of blood? After a brief, extreme fright, Barton stood up immediately. As an ordinary person, he had only one reaction when facing such a situation. That was to call the police. As Barton took the envelope and left his seat, he suddenly remembered something. There were clear rules of how to deal with such situations within the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. If a project were to produce a phenomenon that was terrifying or incomprehensible, employees were to immediately halt everything and report to the compliance department. They would be responsible for the follow-up. Barton didn't understand why he needed to go to the compliance department. From what he knew, this was a department that handled provisions and audit projections for any violations of the rules. It had nothing to do with handling unknown dangers. However, the founder of the foundation, Miss Audrey Hall, didn't make many changes during the internal auditing of the departments. She only added this one clause. Therefore, the higher-ups didn't wish to argue with her over this. And obviously I'd prefer to meet the head of security, Barton muttered as he walked out of his office, heading straight for the compliance department at the end of the corridor. He tried his best to compose himself and knocked on the door 3 times in a gentlemanly manner. Come on in. A voice without any uniqueness came from inside. To be frank, Barton didn't know much about his colleagues at the compliance department. He only knew that they were cold and heartless. They acted quickly and easily caught any parasites within the foundation who tried to cheat the foundation for funding. Taking a deep breath, Barton turned the doorknob and pushed open the door. In his mind, the compliance department likely worked in an abnormally dark environment. Everyone maintained their silence and exchanged a few words from time to time, deciding the fate of a project and its principal investigator. However, the first thing that entered his eyes was bright sunlight, colorful decorations, and an open and bright setting. What's the matter? A black-haired, brown-eyed employee with no special features from the compliance department greeted him. He was wearing a thick black coat, which didn't seem to be able to withstand the cold winter weather in Eastchester. In addition, Barton sensed that the voice of this compliance department employee had a Backland accent to it. Either he was born there, or he had stayed there for quite some time. He isn't cold, mechanical, and difficult to get along with. He even feels friendly. As such thoughts flashed through Barton's mind, he said hurriedly, "A partner of ours seems to have encountered a situation." The letter he sent only consisted of an envelope. There's no content inside, and there's the smell of blood coming from it. The employee from the compliance department didn't show any change in expression. He nodded and said, "Show me the envelope." Barton passed archaeologist Vernal's letter. Only then did he realize that he was being rude. He hurriedly asked, "I'm sorry, how should I address you?" The employee from the compliance department raised the envelope and carefully looked at it against the sunlight. He then casually replied, "Pacheco Duane, Deputy Director of the Compliance Department, an experienced solicitor. Just call me Pacheco." Without waiting for Barton's reply, Pacheco lowered his arm and said with a serious expression, "Indeed, there are some abnormalities. A preliminary conclusion is that this letter is from the Clough Hotel in the city. I once lived there for some time, and I know that they like to emboss Lavender Castle on their envelopes and paper. Do we need to call the police?" Barton blurted out. Pacheco shook his head. "Not for now. Let's go to the venue to confirm the situation. This requires your assistance." "I don't know that, partner." "All right. I'll go with you." Barton hesitated. After exiting the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation and boarding a rental carriage, Barton found the silence rather awkward. He took the initiative to ask, "Pacheco, you're from Backland?" "No." Pacheco shook his head. "I'm from Mid-Seashire. I just happen to have lived in Backland for nearly 15 years. "Why did you leave Backland?" "I heard that it's the city most suitable for lawyers to develop their career," Barton said casually. Pacheco smiled and said, "But it's also a place full of competition." "All right, I was just joking. I was once a personal lawyer and partner of Fromm's Cage, a steam car mogul. Later, he invested in the Backland Bike Company, and I began to work as the company's legal advisor." Barton was suddenly enlightened. "Miss Audrey has a large number of shares in that company. Did you get to know her because of that?" "That's right." Pacheco sighed. "In the war, Fromm unfortunately passed away. His estate fell into dispute. As his friend, I helped his widow and children obtain quite a large share. As a result, I offended some people. This made my situation in Backland become difficult. Fortunately, Miss Audrey extended an olive branch to me and invited me to Eastchester County to work at the foundation as Deputy Director of the Compliance Department." With Pacheco telling him such matters, Barton felt a closer bond with him. He was slightly puzzled and asked, "Why did they target you? You were just carrying out your duty as a friend and a lawyer." "Those people should aim at the widow and children of Fromm's Cage." Pacheco laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "I used some inappropriate methods. Also, Fromm's has other friends to take care of his widow and children." As they chatted, the rental carriage arrived at the Clough Hotel in Stone City. The location of the hotel was rather good. The street was beautiful and quiet, and they only needed to walk for 10 minutes to reach the most bustling streets in the city. After entering the hotel and finding the boss, Pacheco asked directly, "We've come to find a friend named Vernal." Through their casual conversation, he had already grasped the general situation of the target. The boss frowned in puzzlement. "If I remember correctly, there shouldn't be any customer here named Vernal." Barton quickly added, "He's a little taller than me, and he looks very well built. His nose is always very red, and his body often reeks of alcohol." He described the characteristics of Vernal in detail. The boss recalled and looked at the attendant beside him. "There's a guest like that," the attendant replied immediately. "He lives in room 309. Under the attendant's lead, Barton and Pacheco arrived outside the room and knocked on the door. The knocking echoed, but there was no movement inside. Just as Barton was about to suggest calling the police again, Pacheco suddenly bent down and picked up a white, soft tuft of hair from the crack at the bottom of the door. No, it wasn't hair. It resembled the condensation of fog. With Pacheco's fingers touching it, it spread out and merged into the air. At the same time, Barton, whose spiritual perception was slightly different from ordinary people, vaguely heard a faint male voice. Tamara, Tamara. Chapter 1398 In Ordinary Person's Daily Life 4/8 Tamara. Barton ruminated over the name and wondered what it meant. He was no longer the same person who realized that he could hear sounds that others couldn't. He didn't look around in panic, hoping to find someone who was hiding and speaking in a dark corner. There were no signs of him constantly being prepared to grab a wooden pole and rushing over to strike the person. He stood on the spot calmly, observing the reaction of the deputy director of the compliance department, Pacheco. Pacheco glanced at him and said, "Have you done any research in the history of the fourth epoch?" "A little," Barton replied modestly. At this moment, he didn't pretend that he didn't know anything about the history of the fourth epoch. Firstly, his character didn't allow for that. Secondly, his position was a direct result of his academic background in history. If he had any major flaws in this field, he might be fired by the Foundation tomorrow. Pacheco looked at the door and said, "Have you heard of the name Tamara before?" "I've heard of it." Barton instinctively turned his head to glance at Pacheco. In the little-known history of the fourth epoch, the name Tamara has appeared several times, and its frequency is only second to Tudor, Solomon, and Trunsoist. From this, it can be determined that this represents a great noble of some empire in the fourth epoch. After saying this, Barton paused and said, "Vernal recently discovered some ruins from the fourth epoch." As the hotel waiter was by his side, he didn't directly mention that the name, Tamara, might have something to do with the current abnormality Vernal was facing. Pacheco didn't respond. He turned to the hotel attendant and said, "I'm a police officer in charge of a criminal investigation. I suspect that the tenant in this room has encountered some misfortune. Please open the door immediately." As he spoke, he took out an identification document and showed it to the other party. The hotel attendant was shocked and looked at the identification carefully. "Okay, I'll get the keys." As he spoke, he turned around and ran towards the staircase. "You're a policeman?" Barton, who was watching from the sidelines, blurted out in shock. Pacheco looked down at the identification in his hand and chuckled. "This document is 100% real. It was obtained through legal channels." "Why do you need to make it sound so complicated?" Barton habitually replied, "I don't care about its authenticity. I just want to know if you're a police officer." Pacheco laughed. "That depends on how you view it." This answer left Barton rather irritated, but as a typical lone gentleman, he knew that the other party was unwilling to give him an answer directly, so he politely shut his mouth. Of course, one of the reasons included the other party being one of the deputy directors of the compliance department. The two of them remained silent as the hotel owner and the attendant returned to the third floor. After carefully inspecting the identification document in Pacheco's hands and matching it to the face, the hotel owner took out his keys and opened the door. He grumbled, "How did something happen?" Nothing was heard. If a high-end hotel was involved in a murder case, it would definitely affect their image and reputation. They might even go bankrupt. "Don't worry too much. Perhaps it's just a small problem." Pacheco gave him some friendly consolation. "I hope so. May the goddess bless me." The hotel owner retracted his hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion, outlining the stars. Then he gently pushed the door open. At that moment, the interior of the room seemed to connect to the outside world. A faint smell of blood filled the air. "Oh!" The hotel owner noticed this and could only use an exclamation to express his disappointment and fear. Only an environment like this can make the envelope not stained with blood have the smell of blood. This thought flashed through Barton's mind immediately. It was only then that he noticed that the furniture was neatly arranged in the room, and there were no obvious wrinkles on the carpet. It stood in contrast with the smell of blood. It didn't seem like there was a fight, a fatal shot. Barton's hobbies included reading popular novels, especially those that mixed murder and love. Therefore, he had a rather rich experience in such situations. And among all the best-selling authors, the one he loved the most was undoubtedly Kurzweil. In the beginning, The one who bought Furs Wall's few novels was his wife. Barton had once read through one of them and ended up being engrossed in it. Of course, he wouldn't reveal this in front of his wife. He would always use an authoritative tone, saying, "These kinds of novels are shallow and worthless. They're only suitable for killing time." Amidst Barton's thoughts, Pacheco put on a pair of white gloves and walked into the room. After surveying the area, this experienced solicitor walked to the desk and picked up the stack of letters with the lavender castle pattern embossed on it. He said to the hotel owner and waiter, "Do you know how many pieces there were originally? We don't replenish them every day." The attendant looked at his boss and stuttered. What he was trying to say was that after having the guests living in this room rotate out a few times, he had no idea how many letters were left when Vernal moved in. Pacheco scoffed and shook his head. He said to Barton, who was standing beside him, "That's why this world needs order and rules. If they used a set of strict rules, replenishing the number of letters to a set number every time a customer checks out, we could have used this to find some clues." "I don't understand what you mean," Barton answered truthfully. Pacheco smiled and said, "Simply put, only light can cause shadows. Of course, enough chaos also means an opportunity." Barton nodded and said, "Yes, Emperor Roselle once said that chaos is a staircase that leads one up. No one knows if he's the one who said that. There are too many people in this world who don't dare to directly express their views, so they can only rely on the names of others," Pacheco casually replied. Then, he picked up the blank piece of paper at the top and held it against the sunlight that passed through the glass windows. "I love dealing with people who are careless." Pacheco suddenly laughed. After saying this, he put the letter back in its original position. The next second, he took out a sharpened pencil from his pocket and lightly scribbled it over the letter paper. Before long, the traces of Loanese text appeared one after another, forming several scattered sentences. "I've been targeted. The ruins have traces of some religious rituals. I took away the items on the altar. It saw me. Well, it's always been by my side." When he wrote these few sentences, the archaeologist, Vernal, seemed to be undergoing upheavals in his mood, so he had used plenty of force, leaving the most obvious of traces with his pen. Chapter 1399 An Ordinary Person's Daily Life. May 8th. After seeing the marks on the paper, Pacheco turned his head and said to Barton, "What happens next will be quite complicated. I will seek the police's help, and you can return to the Foundation and wait for further questioning." Barton, who was staring at the paper, wasn't disappointed. Instead, he felt relieved and he hurriedly nodded. "All right." After reading the traces left behind by Vernal, Barton's intuition told him that the matter was very dangerous. As an ordinary person, avoiding danger was an instinctive choice. Of course, this was also because Vernal could only be considered one of his ordinary friends. It wasn't worth taking a huge risk and getting involved in this matter. After answering, Barton turned around immediately and walked past the hotel owner and attendant and arrived at the street. This time, he didn't choose to take public transport and instead boarded a rental carriage. Barton's trip outside was considered as a special matter. It was rather urgent, and with the deputy director of the compliance department to testify for him, he could make a claim for the expenses incurred. The difference between spending the Foundation's money and using one's own salary was two completely different feelings. On the way, Barton looked at the scenery outside the window and couldn't help but think about Vernal's current situation. Is he still alive? The room was filled with a strong stench of blood. I hope he's still alive. May the Lord bless him. If he's still alive, where will he be now? Could it be? As his thoughts raced, Barton suddenly thought of a possibility. He quickly instructed the coach driver to change routes and head home. Not long after, he returned home. What happened? Barton's wife approached him with a surprised look. It was still quite some time before lunch, let alone getting off work. Barton didn't take off his hat or jacket. Without answering her question, he directly asked, "Was Vernal here?" "He came to visit you 15 minutes ago. I told him to wait in the study room and send Wells to the Foundation to look for you," Barton's wife replied honestly. Wells was their family's valet. And clearly, 15 minutes wasn't enough for him to reach the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. This was what puzzled Barton's wife the most. Right. Barton nodded heavily. He hurriedly passed through the living room, went up to the second floor, and entered the study. In the study room, the windows were wide open and the curtains were slightly rolled. There was no one there. "Vernal!" Barton shouted, but there was no answer. He jumped out of the window and left. Barton frowned. He looked around seriously and discovered that the books on the bookshelf were in a mess. It was a set of historical books that were split into three-parter volumes. Barton's habit was to arrange them from right to left, and now it was going from left to right. He took a deep breath and quickly walked over to retrieve the three books. After a thorough examination, Barton found that a page in the middle had been folded. He quickly flipped to that page and opened a corner. Scribbled there simply with a pencil were the words, "The refugees of the fourth epoch worshipped an evil god." Barton panicked and turned horrified. He stuffed the book back. Without much thought, he ran out of the study and towards the stairs, preparing to find the deputy director of the compliance department, Pacheco. He wanted to tell him about his discovery and get him to request the police to protect his family. After exiting the house, Barton slowed down and considered an important question. Where do I go to find Pacheco? The Clough Hotel, the Stone Police Headquarters, or the Foundation? After a brief moment of thought, Barton decided to return to the Foundation and look for other employees of the compliance department. At that moment, a rental carriage stopped outside his door as Pacheco Duane alighted. "We discovered that Vernal came to your house again," the deputy director of the compliance department explained quickly. Barton heaved a sigh of relief and replied without hesitation, "Yes, but he has already left. However, he left some clues behind." After saying this, Barton led Pacheco into his own house, went to his study, and handed him the book. Pacheco looked at it for a while, then gently slid his finger across the surface of the text. Right on the heels of that, he took out the pencil he had used previously and wrote beside Vernal's comment, "Call the police." After doing all of this, Pacheco stuffed the book back to its original position. However, he didn't push the book in completely. This way, the entire row of books had one book bulging out. "All right, let's return to the Foundation and have lunch. We'll wait for the good news from the police." Pacheco clapped his hands. Barton didn't understand the reason behind this senior lawyer's actions, but he didn't ask why. He really didn't want to get involved in this matter. He felt that he couldn't bear it at all. Barton then fabricated a few reasons to his wife before returning to the Foundation with Pacheco to begin his daily work. When it was tea time, he had just finished an ancient book's appraisal when he heard someone knocking on the door. "We've got some clues. We need to go to your place," said Pacheco, who was wrapped in a gray scarf and standing by the door. "Clues?" Barton rose in surprise. Pacheco didn't give a direct answer. He spread out his hands and made an inviting gesture. Barton couldn't refuse and went home with the other party. Vernal came again. His wife clearly sensed that something was amiss and went to the door in horror. "It's fine. Just some minor problems." Barton maintained his image as a man and consoled his wife. When he arrived at the study, he and Pacheco discovered that, yet again, Vernal had escaped. Damn it, can't he just wait for a while? Barton couldn't help but grumble. "It's all right." Pacheco walked up to the bookshelf and pulled out the book. Clearly, Vernal had read his suggestion, as the book was completely stuffed into the bookshelf. "I guess I know where Vernal is." Pacheco closed his eyes, smiling. Barton was stunned. "How do you know?" Pacheco opened his eyes and replied with a smile, "He accepted my bribe, no, a gift. But that isn't right either. The most accurate description should be a suggestion. Of course, he might not accept it." With that said, the deputy director of the compliance department walked past Barton and out of the study. Barton followed behind him subconsciously, leaving his own burrow and turning into a nearby street. At the end of the street, there was a house that had collapsed due to a fire. "They actually haven't started reconstruction efforts," Barton whispered. Pacheco put on a pair of white gloves again, and his expression became a little stern. Through the rather intact main door, he entered the half-collapsed hall. Black pieces of wood were strewn across the ground, blocking the lower half of a person's body. The figure was wearing a brown jacket with a red nose. He looked very stocky and was none other than the archaeologist, Vernal. Barton secretly exhaled and asked anxiously, "Why didn't you call the police?" "They're monitoring the police station," Vernal replied without a change in expression. Barton blurted out, "Why didn't you leave Stone and go to other cities to report to the police?" "They're monitoring the steam locomotive station," Vernal replied in the same tone. Barton thought for a moment and frowned. "You have many ways to leave Stone. They can't seal off a city." Upon hearing this question, Vernal's expression gradually changed as he said with a slightly ethereal tone, "I sensed the will of that great existence." Chapter 1400 An Ordinary Person's Daily Life 6/8 Great Existence. As soon as Barton heard Vernal, certain memories hidden deep within his heart surged out. This made it difficult for him to contain his fear. His feet unconsciously took a few steps back. In that the archaeological expedition many years ago, all the nightmares had started with similar descriptions. Just as Barton's body trembled and was about to turn around and run away, the deputy director of the compliance department, Pacheco Duane, brought up a question. "Since you've already sensed the will of that great existence, why didn't you reconcile with the fourth epic refugees who are pursuing you?" Vernal's breathing suddenly became heavier, as if a faint white fog had spewed out. His voice also became louder. Their faith wasn't accepted with their whole body and mind. They still had some reservations. As Vernal spoke, a faint white fog spread out from the half-collapsed house, emitting a strong smell of blood. Barton seemed to come to a realization, but he wasn't in the mood to think. He only wanted to leave this place and escape the danger that was about to erupt. However, Pacheco was rather calm. He looked at Vernal and asked warmly, "You've been visiting Mr. Barton all this while, and writing letters to the Foundation. What kind of help do you want us to provide?" Upon hearing this, Barton was taken aback. If it were another occasion, he would definitely imagine that Pacheco was asking what kind of legal advice Vernal needed. At a time like this, didn't he only have two options? He could either escape and report this to the police, or take out his weapon and fire a bullet at Vernal, or smack him in the head with a pole. Barton was full of doubts about Pacheco's way of handling things. With faint white fog lingering at the tip of his nose, and with his eyes that were glowing with gray light, Vernal didn't show any resistance to this kind of exchange. His expression became solemn as he replied in a dignified tone, "Two things. First, bring this item to the suburbs and return in the evening." While speaking, Vernal threw a glass bottle with a slender neck. The glass bottle seemed to be very sturdy. Even when it fell to the ground, it didn't seem damaged at all despite hitting a rock. Its interior was filled with pale white, thin, almost illusory fog. At that moment, Barton acutely sensed that the body of this deputy director of the compliance department had stiffened a little, as though he had sensed something unusual. Vernal didn't observe their reactions and continued, "Secondly, when you are searching for ancient artifacts, help me find similar items." As he spoke, he took out a piece of paper and spread it open. There was a strange-looking lamp on the paper. It was like a tiny water flask that had a candlewick extend out of its mouth. "No problem." After 2 seconds of silence, Pacheco replied in a low voice, one different from his previous tone. "That's good. Huh, don't you think that our encounter was a coincidence?" Then Vernal tossed the piece of paper aside and leaped up high onto the half-collapsed building. He was like a baboon as he nimbly climbed up and jumped, quickly disappearing from Barton's and Pacheco's sights. "What are we going to do next?" Barton turned to look at the deputy director of the compliance department. Before he could finish speaking, he suddenly stopped. He realized that Pacheco was still standing there, breathing heavily. In addition to that, Pacheco's body was covered with thick black fur. His muscles swelled up, causing the black coat to tighten. Barton's eyes widened as if he wanted to see clearly Pacheco's current appearance. In the blink of an eye, the abnormality on Pacheco vanished. He let out a long breath and said, "We'll wait here. Do you need to pick them up?" Barton pointed at the bottle and paper on the ground. The corners of Pacheco's mouth twitched as he said, "You can pick it up. But you have to keep a distance from me later." Barton blurted out. Will the fog in that glass bottle affect you? There are things that even if you can't be certain about, it's best to not rashly attempt them. Pacheco still didn't give a direct answer. It's really tiring to communicate with him. After pondering for a while, Barton took a few steps forward and stopped in front of the bottle and paper. Just as he bent down to grab the two items, his eyes suddenly lit up with a weak light. Immediately after, a pair of boots appeared before his eyes. The front of one of the boots was curled up high. The other was similar to the rounded-top boots that were popular nowadays, as though they belonged to two different people. Barton's heart tightened. He suddenly straightened his body and looked forward. There was a lady standing opposite him. This lady was wearing clothes that could be considered as two dresses. One side was complex, and the other was simple. One side was colorful, and the other side pure black. This asymmetrical attire made Barton flare up instinctively. He wanted to tear off her clothes and give her a normal dress and a pair of normal boots. This impulsiveness didn't contain any trace of a male's desire to harm women. It was purely because of his disgust and repugnant feeling towards such a sense of aesthetics. After enduring the discomfort, Barton cast his gaze at the lady's head. She had a pretty face, a high nose bridge, full lips, and a pair of dark gray eyes that were rarely seen. She looked to be in her 20s. Barton didn't feel any amazement. Instead, he felt that the lady's appearance was rather strange. After a few seconds, he finally understood the reason. The lady's face was devoid of expression, unlike a real person. It was closer to a wax statue. Vernal has already left. The deputy director of the compliance department, Pacheco, seemed to have completely recovered and took the initiative to speak. The lady's gaze swept across the bottle and paper in Barton's hand. What does he want you to do? Bring this bottle to the suburbs and return only in the evening. Also, we are to help him find the item drawn on the paper, Pacheco answered frankly, putting on an attitude as though he was unwilling to be the lady's enemy. The lady nodded and said, "Give me the bottle." As soon as she finished speaking, Barton seemed to have heard an order that couldn't be disobeyed. He instinctively threw the thin-necked bottle in his hand at the other party. Pacheco seized this opportunity and asked, "You're a member of the Tamara family?" The lady caught the bottle and looked down. "I didn't expect anyone to remember us." Pacheco replied with a smile, "In truth, from the end of the fourth epoch until now, there have always been active members of the Tamara family, but there are very few of them. Have you heard of the Theosophy order? They are the We are us," the lady answered simply before her body rapidly faded away and vanished. Chapter 1401 An Ordinary Person's Daily Life July 8th. After seeing the lady disappear for a few seconds, Pacheco turned his head and said to Barton, "Let's go back to the foundation." "Aren't we going to the suburbs?" Barton asked subconsciously. Pacheco said with a smile, "Didn't you already give the bottle away? We no longer have a reason to go to the suburbs." Perhaps his true aim was for us to hand the bottle to the lady of the Tamara family. What he said before were all lies. Of course, this has nothing to do with us. Next, there is no innocent party among them, so it doesn't matter who dies. All we need to do is perform a certain amount of surveillance to prevent their battle from affecting ordinary people. This will be handled by the police, not by the Foundation or the Compliance Department. Vernal doesn't look like he's capable of this kind of devious plot. Barton mumbled. He didn't ask further and turned to walk out the door. Frankly speaking, returning to the Foundation was the answer he wanted to hear the most. It was just a spur of the moment when he asked if they were heading to the suburbs. It was an old habit he hadn't overcome for many years. After returning to the Foundation, Barton spent the rest of the day feeling rather uneasy. He went through the menial, repetitive routine until evening came. "I originally felt that life was too boring, but I now realize that a monotonous life is so precious. Sigh, I only hope that nothing unexpected happens like in the afternoon. May the Lord bless me." Barton stopped at his doorstep, stretched out his right hand, clenched his fist, and gently struck his left chest. After finishing his prayer, he opened the door and entered. He took off his hat, coat, and handed them over to his wife who had come forward. "What happened to Vernal?" his wife asked carefully. Barton replied calmly in both tone and expression. He offended some people and was being followed. The police have taken over this matter. In the future, if Vernal visits again, don't let him in. Remember to send someone to inform the police." Barton's wife heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that the police had intervened. "All right." After dinner, Barton played with his children for a while before finding an excuse to go to his study and sit near the window. He needed a private space to completely calm his emotions and walk out of the panic brought about by the incident with Vernal. As such, Barton took out a cigarette from his drawer and put it to his mouth. He wasn't addicted to smoking, but he had to socialize sometimes, so he prepared a pack of cigarettes at home and on his body. He lit the matchstick, lit the cigarette, and took a deep suck. He then leaned back in his chair and watched the smoke coming out from his mouth and nose. The white gas quickly spread out in all directions, making Barton suddenly think of the fog coming out of Vernal's mouth and nose. He vaguely smelled the faint scent of blood. To Barton, this wasn't a very strange discovery. After all, Vernal had stayed in his study before, so he definitely left some traces behind. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to detect him. Barton didn't smell it before, but because he was too nervous and flustered, his attention had been focused on the whereabouts of Vernal and the words he had left behind. Of course, the smell of blood in the study room was very faint. It was also one of the reasons why it couldn't compare with the hotel room and the burnt ruins at all. As the smoke from the cigarette spread, Barton suddenly narrowed his eyes. He had an ominous feeling. In an instant, the pale white gas shrank in a certain direction with the smell of blood, forming a figure. The figure's upper body was normal with an iconic red nose. It was none other than the archaeologist, Vernal. The lower half of his body was completely shrouded in air, like a monster drawn out by smoke. "Vi Vernal," Barton shouted, almost suffocating. His voice reverberated in the study, unable to penetrate the wall. I've already acquired an immortal body. As long as there's still some fog left, I'll be able to come back to life." Vernal burst into laughter. Compared to before, his expression became more and more crazed, and his eyes seemed to be slightly palish white. He was already dead just now? This thought subconsciously flashed across Barton's mind. Then he forced himself to remain calm and said, "What's the matter?" As he spoke, Barton wanted to stand up on impulse, but sadly he discovered that his body was covered by a cold and thin fog, and he had lost most of his senses. Vernal stopped laughing and looked into Barton's eyes. He said word by word, "You didn't bring that bottle to the suburbs." Although Barton had a rash personality, he knew that he couldn't answer this question directly. He quickly thought of a solution. A few seconds later, he changed the topic before he spoke again. "Why did you convert to believing in that entity? Aren't you a loyal believer of the Lord?" Vernal fell silent for a moment before his expression gradually became fervent. "I've seen an even larger world, a much more vast world. Compared to that, the planet we are currently living on is like a grain of sand in the desert. There are innumerable civilizations, ancient ruins left behind from hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, or even tens of millions of years ago. This is what the universe looks like." Seeing that his question only made things worse, Barton fell silent. He thought about whether there were any non-sensitive topics that would garner Vernal's interest. He slowly took a deep breath and said, "Other than the altar, what else did you discover at the fourth epic ruin? How much do you know of the Tamara family?" Vernal's eyes lit up. The Tamara family had its coat of arms replaced once. This means that they had encountered something rather major. As he spoke, the archaeologist who was just an upper half of a body had extended his right hand. Using the smoke, he drew out two symbols in midair. The first symbol was formed from a layer of brambles, a shield wall, and a long sword that was vertically inserted into them from above. The main part of the second symbol was a pair of double doors that swung open, and the gap in the middle was taken up by the vertical longsword. As a barely famous historian, Barton immediately thought of the words of the Tamara family member. "They are them. We are us." Did the Tamara family fracture? Barton blurted out. "I thought so," said Vernal, smiling with gratification. Then he leaned close to Barton, his face burning with zeal. "Your brain is more tempting than I imagined. and it's the best supplement for me. Relax a little. Your mind will merge with mine, and we can witness those great civilizations together." He looked very weak and eager to recover. Barton's heart thumped wildly, and he tried his best to avoid the other party. But no matter how hard he struggled, his body seemed to freeze. He was unable to move at all. Just as he was about to close his eyes, Barton suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right hand, and he immediately regained consciousness. The pale white fog in front of him and the monster-like Vernal disappeared as if they had never appeared. Barton lowered his head numbly and saw that the cigarette in his right hand had reached its limit, burning his fingers. It was a dream? But I found it so realistic. Barton threw away the cigarette in his hand and instinctively stood up using his spirituality and walked to the window. He looked out at the streets and saw that under the street lamps, many pedestrians were passing by in the darkness, wanting to rush home as soon as possible. Among them, an ordinary golden retriever was taking a casual stroll. Chapter 1402 An Ordinary Person's Daily Life August 8th. The scene in front of him was so ordinary that Barton didn't feel that there was anything wrong with it. Although he vaguely felt that there was something familiar about it, he didn't think that it was worth puzzling over it. How could a daily scene not be familiar? His gaze shifted as he looked up into the sky. He saw the crimson moon quietly hanging in the sky, shining with light, causing his mood to settle down involuntarily. At that moment, Barton seemed to have let go of an invisible burden. His body and mind were unusually relaxed. He no longer had the same fear, anxiety, and frustration from before. His spiritual intuition told him that Vernal's matter had come to an end, and it would no longer affect his life. Holy Lord of Storms. Lord, thank you for your blessings. Barton immediately struck his left chest with his right fist and muttered to himself. Without anxiety and tension, he felt exhaustion overwhelm him like a flood. It surged from the depths of his soul, drowning his brain, limbs, and every cell in his body. Barton couldn't help but use the back of his hand to cover his mouth. He yawned, but a satisfied smile appeared on his face. He didn't stay in the study any longer and turned around to leave. He returned to the bedroom and took a pleasant bath, enjoying himself as he drank a small glass of red wine. That night, Barton didn't dream anymore and slept exceptionally soundly. When he woke up in the morning, his mind was relaxed and his spirits were rising. It was as if he had obtained a new life. Looking at his wife who was still sleeping beside him, Barton carefully got up, changed his clothes, and walked around the neighborhood. He had never realized how wonderful his district was. The air was fresh, the environment was peaceful, and the scenery was pleasant. Even the pedestrians were cultured. This made Barton's mood even better. Once again, he deeply understood that the matter with Vernal had come to an end, and he had returned to his normal, peaceful life. He maintained his mood and went home to enjoy breakfast with his wife and children. During this process, he even told his wife about a joke he read in the newspapers and fulfilled his children's tiny requests. Seeing the smiles on his wife and children's faces, Barton felt satisfied. Then he put on his coat, hat, and cane before heading out to take a trackless public carriage. He walked all the way to the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation at the periphery of the city. After entering his office, Barton found his usual daily pace. He didn't get right down to work but prepared the special herbal black tea he had prepared himself. With the black tea, he leisurely read the newspapers that he didn't subscribe to at home. Then he picked up the letters and documents he had received and read them. Such a process and pace made him feel exceptionally comfortable. The only difference was that Barton was still a little worried about receiving yet another letter from Vernal. However, this concern didn't turn into a reality. About 15 minutes later, someone knocked on his office door. "Please come in." Barton picked up his cup and took a sip of his black tea. The person who entered was the ordinary-looking deputy director of the compliance department, Pacheco Duane, who didn't have any characteristics that stood out but still managed to give off a warm and friendly vibe. "Did you sleep well last night?" asked Pacheco as he stood at the door. "Excellent." Barton didn't hide anything. Pacheco nodded and smiled. "Seems like you've really gotten rid of the effects from this matter." Barton didn't mention the nightmare he had had. Instead, he asked, "What about you?" "I also slept very well," Pacheco replied with a smile. "The police have already taken over this matter. It's said that they found Vernal last night. Unfortunately, he apparently encountered some misfortune. Poor soul, I hope he can rest in peace." Barton didn't pray that the Lord would protect him, because Vernal had already abandoned his faith in the Lord of Storms. If there were really any blessings to be bestowed, then it would definitely be lightning blasts and storms. With that said, he thought of the help that Pacheco had provided and his friendly attitude. He said, "Shall we have lunch together later?" "Are you treating?" asked Pacheco with a smile. "Of course. It's a pleasure to meet a friend like you." Barton stood up and bowed gentlemanly. Pacheco nodded slightly and said, "Then I'll wait at the compliance department for your invitation. Before 12. "No problem." Apart from being grateful to him, Barton also felt that knowing the deputy director of the compliance department would be a great help to his future work. Furthermore, he believed that Pacheco was just like him. In some aspects, he was stronger than the average person. After seeing Pacheco leave his office, Barton sat down again, silently and slowly exhaling. As an ordinary person with a normal IQ, he could tell that the matters regarding Vernal were very strange. It involved the problems of mysticism and religion. In addition, he was actually very interested in the details of the Tamara family's fracturing and the secret history of the fourth epoch, and the details to which Vernal had encountered. However, he knew that he couldn't probe further. It was thanks to the great luck of an ordinary person for him to be able to see the tip of the iceberg without dying. If he wanted to figure out the situation beneath the water surface, he would definitely drown to death. The past archaeological expedition made Barton not dare to take the risk, nor did he want to take any risks. To him, curiosity was probably the most worthless thing. After pondering for a while, Barton continued his work. When it was almost noon, he tidied the items on the table and picked up the coat and top hat hanging on the clothes rack. He left the office and walked to the door of the compliance department. Barton knocked on the wooden door in front of him. Soon, Pacheco opened the door and glanced at Barton. "Give me another 5 minutes. I still have some matters to settle." "No problem." Barton didn't mind at all. "Come on in and wait," Pacheco said casually. Barton didn't stand on ceremony. He walked into the compliance department and found a chair to sit down. As his gaze moved, he realized that there were about 6 to 7 members in the compliance department. Just then, he heard someone knocking on the door. Without waiting for the employees of the compliance department to get up, the door creaked open. The first to enter was the vice president of the Lone Relic Search and Preservation Foundation. He was a lively old man. He looked around and paused for a second before saying, "Seems like everyone is here. Let me introduce you to a new colleague." As he spoke, the vice president took a few steps forward, revealing the new employee of the compliance department behind him. She was a woman in her 20s. She had a high nose bridge and a pair of moist, full lips. Her eyes were dark gray and her face was pretty. She wore a common blue dress. However, there was no expression on her face. She didn't look like a real person. She looked more like a wax statue. The gazes of Barton and Pacheco froze. The vice president continued smiling and said, "She will be like Pacheco, taking on the role of the deputy director of the compliance department. Her name is Alicia Tamara." The end to an ordinary person's daily life. Author's note: there's no way to go in-depth in the end to an ordinary person's daily life. This is just a showcase of the tip of the iceberg without going deep. Yes, it's also an experimental form of narrating the story. If the ending is meant to have the effect of horror without any consideration of values, then it will be written as such. As he spoke, the vice president took a few steps forward, revealing the new employee of the compliance department behind him. She was a woman in her 20s. She had a high nose bridge and a pair of moist, full lips. Her eyes were dark gray and her face was pretty. She wore a common blue dress. The gazes of Barton and Pacheco froze. At that moment, the lady's lips curled up as she said with a radiant smile, "Hello everyone. I'm Alicia Tamara." Chapter 1403 in modern day 1. I'm an ordinary company employee. My greatest joy every day is that I can clock off on time. This isn't something that can be realized often, because it's only from working overtime that I can receive a higher salary. Only from doing so can I gain a little sense of security. In this aspect, my boss isn't that bad. At the very least, he'll pay for overtime, unlike the company next door who only knows how to shout slogans. All they do is pump up the employees without sparing a single penny. Based on my observations, they aren't far from closing down, because their boss is already trying to sell off second-hand computers on his WeChat moments. This isn't something I discovered. I'm not friends with their boss on WeChat. This comes from the mouths of the employees. In this world, it's sexist to say that there's gossip where there are women present. Instead, there's gossip wherever there are people. Of course, I don't have absolute confidence in those words. There was once a time when a dog and a cat made me feel that they were watching us humans with amusement and gossiping. Just like now, the golden retriever that always appears near my office building is sitting at the entrance. Seriously, looking at the grooming of its fur, it doesn't look like it doesn't have a master. How can someone walk a dog without a leash? This kind of person shouldn't be rearing pets. They have no morals at all. There's a necklace around its neck, a rope, and the end of the rope is in its mouth. As I mumble, I recall of an emoticon that has been trending online. It has strong self-control. I snort and cast my eyes beyond the glass doors. The sky is so dark, and large beads of raindrops pummel through the stuffy, humid environment and crash into the ground. Fuck, it rained so quickly. At this moment, I want to question God. It hadn't been easy for me to get off work on time today. To think that I would encounter a storm. Furthermore, I didn't bring an umbrella with me. Back when I was in the office, I noticed that it was dark and gloomy outside and knew that a storm was coming, but I thought I had enough time to get to the bus stop. By the time my bus arrives close to my rented apartment, the rain should have stopped or be reduced to a drizzle. After all, it's summer and the rain comes and goes quickly. I can't help but raise my middle finger at God. Helpless, I turn my head to look at the golden retriever by the door and casually say, "You didn't bring an umbrella as well?" That was just a self-deprecating comment of mine, but the next moment I'm shocked. The big golden retriever rolls its eyes at me. It rolled its eyes at me. Its eyes. I knew it. This dog has some humanity in it. I look away and mutter. I examine the storm outside again, wondering if I should just run to the bus stop. I sniff and, considering how I haven't recovered fully from my cold, I hold back the urge. Sigh, as a grown man, isn't it normal to only bring a phone, a transportation card, and a key access card? Who would carry a bag and have an umbrella inside for no reason? These days, I don't even keep change on me. Forget it. I'll just go back to the office and kill time. I'll browse through websites and wait until the rain becomes a drizzle before I leave. If it really doesn't pan out as I expect, then I'll order takeout. I sigh and turn to walk to the elevator. Suddenly, I notice an additional vending machine in one corner of the building lobby. Summon coffee? I suddenly feel like drinking something. I did as I thought. With the financial freedom to buy beverages below 10 yuan, I confidently walk over to the vending machine and take a gander at the beverages on sale. Maizone, Nongfu Spring, Master Kong Iced Tea, and Jasmine Tea. I notice something strange when I look through the beverages on display. It's a box, placed in the corner of the topmost row of beverages. What the hell? I glance at the screen and read the scrolling images and text. Soon, I understand what the box is. It's the recently popular real-life loot box. There are loot boxes even with beverages these days? It really is a tax on one's intelligence. Gambling is indeed exciting. I mutter as I scan what possible contents might be in the loot box. Damn, this is interesting. This loot box is actually related to a new beverage product. It has never appeared on the market before, the bottle has a unique design, and the names are very stylish. Seer, Apprentice, Bard, Warrior, Sleepless, I like that. There's also Lawyer, Assassin, Hunter. I glance at the price of the loot box and realize that it only costs 5 yuan. It's cheaper than I expected, so I decide to give it a try. Life is short, so why not give it a try? As a slave of society, the daily working hours go from 9 to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Excluding work time, eating, sleeping, and commuting, there's very little free time for leisure. Even the monotonous life would get to robots with this happening day after day. It's just so boring. The property prices are even more depressing. They make you lose the motivation to work hard. One becomes dejected or just takes on a mantra of letting things come as they may. To be able to find a new thrill in cheap forms of entertainment other than novels, comics, videos, and games can be considered a surprise. Taking my phone out, I start scanning the QR code. At the same time, I mutter a few names in my mind. Seer, Sleepless, Spectator, Assassin. These are the beverages that I hope for the most from the loot box. I will be satisfied as long as it's one of them. After paying, the vending machine seemed to be stuck. It didn't move for quite a while. I suspect that it's trying to cheat me. Is it packaging it on the spot? I complain as I seriously consider making a complaint. At this moment, the vending machine finally showed signs of movement. The loot box is pushed out and falls to the dispenser with a thud. It's time to witness a miracle. I bend down and push open the sliding panel of the dispenser and pull out the loot box that I really can't consider exquisitely packaged. After I quickly open the box, I see a bottle wrapped in coiled snakes. Based on what I saw on the screen, I'm able to recognize which drink it is. As an Assassin's Creed gamer, this is an outcome I've been looking forward to, Assassin. Chapter 1404 in modern day too nice. I can't help but snap my fingers with my free hand. As someone who has never even won a consolation prize, to be able to get a beverage I wanted is simply exciting. Furthermore, the most important thing is that I only spent 5 yuan. Otherwise, I'll definitely hit it trying it 10 times in a row. I need to keep this bottle well. I put away my phone, open the can, and take a mouthful of the beverage. In the next second, my head suddenly turns a little numb. I feel like everything around me has become abnormally blurry, and my entire body becomes light as though I'm about to turn into a feather. In this strange feeling, I vaguely hear muffled ravings that sound like fingernails scratching a blackboard. The taste of a demoness ain't bad. The taste of a demoness ain't bad. The taste of a demoness ain't bad. This brings an indescribable pain, and I lose all my ability to think. By the time the torture ends, I can't remember what happened towards the end, but I know that my face must have been very twisted and hideous. What the hell is this beverage? I turn angrily to look at the vending machine. At that moment, my head is spinning and my eyes swell. I have the feeling that I'll collapse at any moment. However, this doesn't stop me from discovering a fact. The vending machine that still existed moments ago has disappeared. Holy shit. I can't take my spinning head and the soreness in my eyes. I quickly remove my glasses and prepare to squeeze my nose bridge. However, just as I take off my glasses, everything returns to normal. My head doesn't spin and my eyes no longer ache. My vision remains clear, clearer than even before my myopia. I scan my surroundings, and every detail is reflected in my eyes. Even a dozen meters away, a mosquito silently suspended on a black stone is vividly clear. I've recovered from my short-sightedness? That bout of fainting was because of the glasses? I glance around once more, and for some reason, I feel that my vision has exceeded that of a normal person's. As I try hard to recall, I gradually come to a realization. I can change part of my body's structure for a short amount of time. I can obtain feather-like lightness. Even if I jump from high above, I won't be hurt. A hawk-like vision that allows me to see through the darkness. I'm good at hiding in the shadows. My steps are nimble and my body is agile. The instantaneous strength I can release is tremendous. I can concentrate all my strength into a single strike. As I suspect that the assassin beverage that I had just taken was actually some mental drug that gives me hallucinations, I also feel that something might have really happened due to my recovery from short-sightedness. I put on my glasses again and realize that it does leave me faint. No way this is real. The vending machine is gone. It was still there a moment ago. Did I have a fortuitous encounter? I cast my gaze out of the lobby and see people carrying umbrellas or have their backpacks raised in the heavy rain, running about in a hurry. Before this, I could only barely see silhouettes in this scene, But now, I can confirm the features of every pedestrian. Of course, the prerequisite is that they aren't wearing face masks. A fortuitous encounter. Don't tell me it's really a fortuitous encounter. I would occasionally fantasize about having a fortuitous encounter, for example, striking lottery worth 10 to 20 million yuan, but I never expected such a day. Moreover, it's the assassin ability that I wanted the most. Even if it's fake, just healing my short-sightedness makes me give this fortuitous encounter full marks. I control my excitement and joy and carefully examine my body. After confirming that there's nothing wrong with it, I close my eyes and mutter to myself, "Thank you, God. Thank you, vending machine. Thank you, loot box." I have to find a place to test the leap of faith. I've recovered from my cold too. I'll think further about it after the rain stops. I look around again, eager to test what it means to have dexterous steps, agility, and explosive power. Of course, as a normal person with regular intelligence, I know that I should avoid others in times like this, lest I expose my fortuitous encounter and create a series of unknown developments. At this moment, due to the heavy rain, the people inside the building either have to work overtime or have already left. Those without umbrellas either have realized the reality of things or haven't left the office. They either return to the office or bravely run to the bus stop. Therefore, other than the two security guards who have their backs to me, there's no one else in the lobby. I can give it a try. Yes, there's a dog. So what if I'm seen by a dog? It doesn't understand anything. Would it be able to tell anyone? I immediately widen my pace and run toward the elevator. I can feel the changes in my body. Using a machine as an analogy, my body used to be a rusted machine that had been soaked in water. Now, it was a new, lubricated machine. A few steps later, I suddenly remember something. Previously, several companies in the building had been a victim of theft. Through the surveillance cameras, the police found the criminal. In other words, there are surveillance cameras in the lobby, and my every move is being monitored. Bear with it, bear with it. I stop my attempts and turn back to look at the spots where there might be cameras. My gaze sweeps across the huge golden retriever at the door. It's still impassively looking at the rain outside. I'll wait till I get home. I let out a slow sigh, hold my glasses, and head for the elevator. I heard from my gossiping colleagues at the company that the theft was done by a young rag-and-bone man from nearby. In the past, this guy was the son of a rich man. Later on, his family waned, and he could only make a living being a rag-and-bone man. However, the police never found him. I take the elevator and go back to the 10th floor. My mind is filled with how to be an assassin hiding in the city's shadows. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. I mutter a few slogans and exit the elevator. Glancing around, I see a figure standing by the window at the elevator lobby. He has rare, long silver hair. His features are very distinctive. So I recognize him. He's the vice president of the company next door, whose surname is Wu. Of course, this might only be his Chinese surname, because he's either a foreigner or a mixed blood. It's such a pity that this guy isn't an idol. He's so good-looking that even the girls in our company often try to, coincidentally, bump into him. They give him flowers and food. It's like he has everything easy in the game of life. The boss next door really has bad taste. With such an employee, I'd have long changed to running an entertainment company. I don't know what the company next door is busy with every day. Until today, I don't even know what they do. All of them are garrulous, completely unlike Rosen when she's joking. They're probably doing multi-level marketing, right? I quickly retract my gaze and not greet him. After all, we're not familiar with each other. But just at this moment, I see that guy turn around and walk over. Chapter 1405. In modern day 3. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be nervous if the vice president from next door came to me. After all, I'm not under his jurisdiction. And I'm not a girl either. My sexual orientation is very normal. No matter how good he looks, it has nothing to do with me. I'm even a little jealous. But now, I've just drunk a bottle of some strange beverage of unknown origins and obtained the abilities of an assassin I've been dreaming of. No matter who comes near me, I can't help but feel uneasy, afraid that others might discover my secret. At this moment, the silver-haired guy stops in front of me and says coldly, "Do you have a lighter?" This isn't an attitude a person should have when asking someone for help. Why are you looking at someone like you're looking at an object? Also, the greatest hobby of youngsters nowadays is to stay up late instead of smoking. Why would I bring a lighter with me? No. I shake my head. At the same time, I sigh inwardly. If the female colleagues in my company find out that the handsome vice president next door smokes, they would definitely have their fantasies crushed. This vice president's appearance and temperament easily makes one believe he's some untainted immortal. It's impossible to associate him with vices like smoking. With this in mind, I can't help but ask casually, "Smoking?" The vice president, who has long silver hair and a beautiful face, raises his right hand, revealing a cigarette between his fingers. "People are under the impression that you don't smoke," I reply with a smile. As a slave of society, it's normal for me not to be afraid of the vice president of the company next door. However, ensuring a cordial relationship is almost definite. After all, one has no idea when they will need to job hop and become their subordinate. Having one more friend means one more outlet. Of course, if this gentleman keeps staying in the company next door, then I won't consider such matters. I don't want to enter a weirdo company that just yells slogans 800 times a day. However, if they're willing to pay me a salary of more than 30,000 yuan a month, I dare say that I'll jump ship today. This is the business world, and the first principle is to not go against money. Anyway, as long as I don't violate the law and do not commit crimes, what's wrong with shouting slogans? If I get paid 100 yuan with every shout, I can shout until I make the company go bankrupt. Hearing my words, the vice president seems to fall silent for a moment before saying, "A friend of mine taught me. When it comes to vices like smoking, who doesn't get introduced to it by friends? Only a small number of parents will lead their children astray." Just as I lampoon inwardly, the vice president next door says in fluent Mandarin, "He's been dead for many years." "I'm sorry," I respond reflexively. After that, I find it strange. "Why are you telling me this?" This vice president doesn't look too smart. Since we aren't familiar with each other, I exchange a few pleasantries and stop. I'm too lazy to bother. I point to the corridor leading to my workplace. "I have matters to tend to." The vice president nods without any change in expression. He turns around and walks back to the window by the elevator lobby, as if he's watching the rainy scene below. I leave the elevator lobby and take a right turn into my workplace and head to the office where my department is located. They're all gone? They took all the umbrellas? I switch on the lights and scan the room. That's right. It hadn't rained when clocking off at regular hours. I left 10 minutes later and happened to be caught in the rain. Seeing that there was no one in the office, my thoughts became active. I originally thought of watching videos in the office, checking out the young ladies dancing indoors and finding inspiration from live eating broadcasts to figure out what to eat for dinner. But now, I'm very restless, and I want to test out the various abilities of an assassin. Among them, the thing that attracts me the most is leap of faith. No, feather drop spell. No, that's not right either. Who knows what it's called? In short, it's the ability to temporarily change my body structure and land on the ground like a light feather. This is undoubtedly the most surreal ability of assassins. Of course, it is also equally important to me that I've had my short-sightedness cured and gained excellent vision. I have to give it a try. I slip my glasses into my pocket and dash to the side window of the big office. It faces a small alley. There's a refuse room that's erected there and no one usually walks past it, let alone when it's heavily raining now. 10 stories, an empty alley. It's the best place to test the leap of faith. I open the window and cast my gaze down. There are no signs of any pedestrians in the heavy rain. The roads are bleak and gloomy. It's dark everywhere. The refuse room looks like a small hand could cover it from the 10th floor. Forget it. It's better to find somewhere lower for the first test. Just as I reveal an embarrassed and polite smile, I hear a voice behind me. "What are you doing?" Startled, I turn quickly. Then I see my boss. He had walked into the large office with one hand in his pocket at some point in time. He's looking at me. "Mr. Huang, I'm checking to see if the rain has stopped. I quickly think of one reason. My president's surname is Huang, with the first name Tao, a very handsome, fashionable man. At the same time, he's a strange man who became a father at the age of 18. His daughter has already started college this year. He's only 36 years old and is still swimming through the gals. He stays on the periphery amidst the embrace of news anchors and actresses. CEO Huang doesn't seem to have any doubts about my reason. He nods and says, "You didn't bring an umbrella?" The more you live, the younger you become. Glancing at the president's hair, which had been dyed chestnut, I honestly reply, "Don't have such a habit." CEO Huang lifts his hand and strokes his chin. "I have a few spare umbrellas in my office. Come over and take one." "You prepared so many?" I ask in a respectful tone. After all, he's the one paying my salary, and it's quite sizable. So Huang smiles and says, "It's from the few ladies from before. As you know, they always like to bring umbrellas with them." "You've extended the battlefield of your flings to the office? Didn't you say that the thing you're afraid of the most is letting your daughter know about this? Doesn't your daughter visit your office every week?" I'm first left surprised before nodding. "All right." CEO Huang doesn't say anything else as he turns and walks towards the door. The way he's standing and how his body is posed gives me a strange feeling. I believe that if I were to seize this opportunity and unleash my full strength, I'll definitely be able to backstab him. Is this an assassin's instinct? Just as I have this thought, I see CEO Huang stop in his tracks and turn his head back. Did he sense my ill intent? My body stiffens. CEO Huang seems to be deep in thought as he slowly asks, "How's your accent?" "Passable," I mutter carelessly. CEO Huang nods. "Help me pick up a VIP at the airport tomorrow morning. I'll get old AI to send you the details." "Okay." I don't dare to say no. After agreeing, I ask, "Mr. Huang, the VIP is a foreigner?" "Yes." CEO Huang gives an affirmative reply. At the mention of this topic, I can't help but ask, "Mr. Huang, why are there so many foreigners around us? We even have to come up with a foreign name in the company?" CEO Huang leans back slightly and says, "What is an international metropolitan city? This is it." Chapter 1406 in modern day 4. After borrowing an umbrella from CEO Huang, I decided to immediately leave the company and return to my rented apartment. I plan on testing out my newfound assassin powers in what's considered the safest environment. I live in those old districts that haven't been spruced up. I spend nearly an hour commuting via public transport. The place is filled with old and shabby houses. It's completely different from the high-end buildings found in the new city districts. But living here is more convenient. Besides, the rent is quite cheap. Since I'm clocked off on the dot today, and there wasn't much of a delay during the journey back and forth, it's still not yet 6 o'clock. Even if I settle my dinner near my neighborhood, I'll arrive home before 7 o'clock. It's in line with the habits of a modern person. Therefore, I didn't consider settling my dinner near the office. Instead, I rushed to the bus stop with my umbrella. This umbrella is colorful, and it has rabbit ears on it. It really isn't suitable for a stealthy man like me. I look up and run out the door. One has to bow when under the umbrella after all. By now, the storm has gone on for about 10 minutes, and the ground is beginning to pond. If it were in the past, I would have stepped into a puddle and stained my shoes and pants with dirt and mud. But now, my feet are deft, sharp, accurate, and each step is light. I manage to keep my pants and shoes clean in the rain. As expected of an assassin, I glance at the bus stop that's just a few feet away from me. Just as I'm about to cross the non-motor vehicle lane, I suddenly see a man walk past me without an umbrella or raincoat. His hair is already wet under the heavy rain. His clothes cling to his body as they droop down, water streaming down continuously. His image is so pathetic, yet his posture remains so relaxed. He isn't running at all. All he does is keep his hands in his pockets as he strolls forward. Impressive. Due to the rain and the dark sky, I'm unable to discern his face clearly. I only watch him walk past me. Perhaps sensing my gaze, the man suddenly takes out a cigarette from his pocket and puts it in his mouth. He mutters softly, "Wimp." I dig my ear with my empty right hand. Who is he talking about? Forget it, I won't argue with a lunatic. I'm in a good mood today. I ignore the man, step up to the bus stop platform, and wait for my bus to arrive. My luck isn't bad. It takes about a minute before bus 35 arrives. Taking out my travel card, I close the umbrella and rush forward. Hearing the beep, I suddenly feel a little emotional. If only the travel card can be stored on my phone's NFC, it would be more convenient. I only need to bring my phone when I'm out. Door locks, the subway, and public buses can all be resolved through my cell phone. If I switch my door lock to a fingerprint one, I don't even need to bring my keys with me. That's what I call convenience. As I think about it, I find a seat. Perhaps due to the heavy rain and that it's some time after peak hour, there are still quite a few empty seats left on the usually crowded bus. Unfortunately, the prerequisite for switching to a fingerprint lock is for me to have my own house. My fantasy is defeated by cold reality. In this international metropolitan city, with my salary, I don't know when I'll be able to afford a house if I don't get help from my parents. I can't help but wonder how to use the powers of an assassin to make money. Take on assassin missions? No, it's illegal. Although I'm a real, powerful assassin now, I can't beat bullets. Besides, I don't know where to take on such missions either. It's against the law to break into houses and steal. Besides, other people don't have their money dropping from trees, unless I can lock onto a corrupt official. I have agile footwork, nimble limbs, and eagle-like vision. How do I earn money with these? Be a security guard? But how much can a security guard earn every month? Or, try dancing? With this kind of control over the body, my dancing will definitely be very impressive. Then I can do a live broadcast? However, I'm tone deaf. As I think through the possibilities, I suddenly feel a little depressed. It wasn't easy for a miracle to fall from the sky, yet I can't use it to improve my life or earn lots of money with it. It cured my short-sightedness at the very least. It's a medical miracle that can't be bought even with millions. I exhale slowly and tell myself not to be too greedy. At this moment, I suddenly feel a chill. It's not from the air conditioning, but a coldness that pierced through my skin. I turn my head and look to the side, only to see that there's no one sitting there. My instincts tell me that there's something invisible there. Is a ghost? I can sense ghosts after becoming an assassin? I first widen my eyes and carefully observe. Then, I retract my gaze and pretend not to notice anything. If the ghost realizes that I can see it, I'm doomed. Assassins do not have abilities to deal with ghosts. My body uncontrollably tenses up. I try to act as if nothing had happened, but I'm helpless. The chilly feeling grows stronger, as if it's getting closer and closer to me. I look straight, but a vision appears in my mind. A blurry man with a bluish-black face draws nearer and nearer to me. He leans to my ear and blows his breath on my face to test my reaction. This cold lasts for nearly a minute before it gradually weakens. Before long, the bus stops and the two doors open at the same time. The cold and terrifying aura disappears. The ghost reached its stop? Even ghosts use buses to travel? I relax and have a better understanding of the changes in my body. I'm not surprised that there are ghosts because I have become an assassin. Everything is possible. The bus stops along the way and I arrived at Hong Kong North Road 50 minutes later. My rental apartment is nearby. Since the storm has stopped, I don't use the umbrella. I get off the bus and go straight for the place I had planned on eating while on the bus. Yuzhou Stir Fry. There are many old shops in this old district that serve delicious food at cheap prices. This is one of them. If it weren't for the rain earlier, many tables would be set up outside. Inside the store, I casually glance around. I smile as I walk to a table and sit opposite a young man. He ordered only a bowl of yusyang shredded pork and white rice. He's looking at his phone while eating with full focus. Not on a date? I rap the table, startling the guy opposite me. He's my childhood friend, Peng Deng. Recently, he's also been working in this international metropolitan city. As I helped him find a place to live, we ended up living very close to each other. It's all in the same neighborhood. How can I have a date when the weather is so bad? Peng Dang looks up at me. He doesn't put down his phone and asks, "Wanna play some ranked matches tonight?" I'm not free. I have no intention of playing games right now. I just want to try the leap of faith. Peng Dang studies me intently for a few seconds. You have a girlfriend? I hope so too. I turn my head to the boss. 1 stir-fried sliced beef, 1 tomato fried egg soup, and a bottle of Coke. When something good befalls one, celebrations are in order. Chapter 1407 In modern day 5 Upon hearing my reply, Peng Dang lowered his head again. As he looks at his phone, he feeds himself and casually asks, "What else is there after work? Don't you work overtime if something's up?" Good question. I lean the umbrella and seriously think of an excuse. Peng Dang is a typical smartphone zombie who doesn't even focus on eating. Most of his attention is on his cell phone, but he's actually a very sharp person. He's good at capturing details and can always easily see through my lies. Of course, most of those lies were a product of not putting enough thought into it. They're more like jokes. I can't tell him that I'm trying to jump off a building, right? After some thought, I wrap the table. My boss wants me to pick up a foreign guest at the airport tomorrow, and he'll only give me the details at night. I'll have to make some preparations. I need to practice my accent and contact a driver to confirm the schedule. It's plenty of work. Yeah. Peng Dang takes a bite of rice and the meat shreds before swallowing it. Then, he asks with a smile, "The Casanova boss you mentioned before?" I never said that. I outright deny Peng Dang's claim. When he looked up at me, I smiled. I said he fooled around. You mustn't make mistakes when passing judgment. Peng Dang replies before looking down at his phone. Before long, the dishes I ordered are served. One is stir-fried sliced beef, and the other is tomato fried egg soup. The oil on the former glistened, and the aroma of celery perfectly fused with the beef's aroma. The meat was very tender, and its juices were salty, but not excessive. The sauce was filled with flavors, and with just 1 plate of this meat, I could finish it with 3 bowls of rice. The tomato fried egg soup is part of Sichuan cuisine. Lard is used first. After it's heated up, beaten eggs with water and salt are added to the mix until it's completely cooked. This way, the fried eggs would be fluffier, and there will be a certain level of saltiness to it. Following that, water and processed tomatoes are put in, along with a few green vegetables. Finally, the soup will have the obvious fragrance of oil and eggs, mixed with the sweet and sourness of tomatoes. The freshness of the green vegetables make the soup have the delight of a meat soup, but without the cloyed taste at all. Just as I drink a bowl of delicious egg soup, the boss walks over with a bowl of rice and a bottle of cold Coke. Ice cock. I can't help laughing inwardly as I heard his accent. Considering that I have to jump off a building later, it wouldn't be good to eat too much. I ultimately only have 2 bowls of rice. Of course, I definitely wouldn't waste the meat and eggs. At this moment, Peng Dang still has a third of his food left. Don't use your phone while eating, don't eat while using your phone. I stand up and give him a heartfelt lecture. At the same time, I boldly pay only for my share. Peng Dang and I aren't hypocritical friends who insist on footing the bill. Furthermore, it's the end of the month. Finances are always a little tight during this time of the month. Fuck, you didn't even give me a bottle of Coke. It only took this long before Peng Dang realized it. I'm done eating. I pick up the umbrella leaning against the table. Extravagant. Peng Dang appraises my choice of buying a bottle of Coke. Something good happened to you? Or are you moonlighting? Before he can ask me, his gaze suddenly stops on the umbrella with the rabbit ears in my hand. Hey! He makes a strange sound. My boss lent it to me. You know that he has many girlfriends. I understand what Peng Dang is thinking. How boring. Peng Dang turns his attention back to his phone again. I enter the old compound of my rented apartment after leaving the shop. The tallest building is only 6 stories, so there aren't any elevators. When I pass the entrance to the first floor, I catch a glimpse of the mailbox through the corner of my eye. Some memories churn, making me walk over involuntarily and open the letterbox that belongs to Unit 602. There's a postcard lying quietly inside. Even without looking, I know that she was the one who had sent it. She was a middle school classmate and high school classmate with me and Peng Deng. She later went overseas for studies and is currently working in this city. Her family background is good, and she often travels. From time to time, she'll send local specialties or postcards to friends in the same city. I hesitate for 2 seconds before picking up the postcard. The back is indeed familiar as graceful handwriting is plastered across it. This is the famous Sedlec ossuary around here. I flip the postcard and take a look. The pillars and walls that are lined with skulls make me feel horrified. Then I feel that strange sense of holiness. Shaking my head, I put away the postcard and return to Unit 602. This is an old apartment with 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. It has a history of at least 20 years. I live in a guest room, and a young couple lives in the master bedroom. This couple are nice people. Not only do they have a sense of hygiene, but they often cook by themselves and invite me to eat together. The only problem is that they quarrel at least twice a week. It's quite annoying. I plan to move to stay with Peng Deng when the rental contract is over. Of course, the prerequisite is that he hasn't started living with his girlfriend yet. After putting down the umbrella, I go to the window of the guest room. I peek out and look outside, considering whether I should jump. Although the rain has stopped, the sky is already dark and there aren't many pedestrians. 6-4. Forget it, I'll go to the building with the small supermarket. I think it's better to be safe for the first time. It's only 3 stories. This neighborhood is very old, and it has a large population. Hence, there are plenty of stores on the first floor. There are hairdressers, eateries, as well as grocery stores and repair shops. One doesn't even need to leave the compound to have access to these amenities. I change into black clothes as a protective color and take my keys and phone. I arrive at a small supermarket after circling the compound for a while. I go up the stairs to the rooftop. Looking at the height, I finally feel confident. When I headed downstairs just now, I tried to jump from one flight of stairs to the other. It greatly improved my confidence in the leap of faith. Waiting until there's no one below me, I take a deep breath, climb over the railing fence, and pose in a ready stance. It's raining and the road is very slippery. How about next time? If I fall and get sent to the hospital, I'll die a societal death if everyone misunderstands this as me attempting suicide. It's only 3 stories. There was nothing wrong with the feeling I had just now. After some random thought, I raise my middle finger at myself and exhale slowly. With a tremble, I leap up and adjust my body. The speed I descend at is slower than normal. The wind turns into a blanket, holding me up in silence. This kind of slowness is only relative. I still quickly land on the ground steadily, without wobbling or splashing up the muddy water on the ground. At that moment, I feel like a sharp feather. What a marvelous feeling. 10 points. I praise myself. This is really too exciting. I'm a true blue assassin who has surpassed all mortals. Heart blazing, I dash back to the building where my rented apartment is. I can't wait to test the leap of faith from the 6th floor. The experience just now tells me that 6 floors isn't a problem. If it's any higher, I'll have to be like Jackie Chan, finding items in the middle, like an air conditioner, to break my fall, jumping down several floors at a time. On the way, I widen my eyes in an attempt to find any acts of sexual misconduct by hooligans, robberies by ruffians, or extortions by baddies. I want to let them have a taste of the power of an assassin, but, sigh, the security in the neighborhood is really good. I sigh and head home. At this moment, my phone rings twice. I take it out and discover that it's from my company's old AI. It's the information regarding our VIP. Zarathustra, what a complicated name. I smirk and decide on reading the details after another leap of faith. Sigh, even if I'm an extraordinary assassin, I still have to work on stuff my boss instructs me to do after work like, as the Japanese put it, a shichiku, a corporate cattle. Otherwise, I won't be able to survive. What can an assassin do? Buy a Spider-Man's mask and do a parkour livestream session? Without being in a rush to enter the bedroom. I once again think about how to make money using my assassin abilities. At this moment, someone knocks on the door. Who is it? I ask loudly. I'm here to check on temporary living permits. Someone outside replies. I don't have it, goodbye. I lampoon as I walk to the door and look outside through the peephole. Two people in police uniforms stand outside the door, with one of them standing in front, blocking the face of the other. He has a receding hairline and his eyes are slightly gray. For some reason, I suddenly quiver and feel inexplicably sad. I open the door. My surname is Deng, and I'm the officer in charge of this compound. The gray-eyed officer introduces himself with a smile. Then he looks at the information in his hand. Zhou Mingrue, am I right? Chapter 1408 in modern day 6, yes. For some reason, I'm restrained and a little sad. It's almost indescribable. It's as if someone had punched my nose. My eyes are sore and I'm about to cry. I can understand the restraint. Apart from a few people, most ordinary people would definitely be rather cautious when facing the police. I'm no exception. But why do I have the sudden urge to cry? These emotional changes and fluctuations are beyond my expectations. From what I know, such a situation wouldn't even happen to an extremely sensitive artistic youth. Could this be the side effects of the assassin potion? Is this the price for obtaining superpowers? I blink and control my emotions. Then, I hear Officer Deng say, "Your temporary living permit." Before he can finish, another officer whispers, "Captain, it's called a residence permit now." You've forgotten again? Yes, yes, yes. I forgot. Officer Deng wasn't embarrassed at all. He smiled and said to me, "Where's your residence permit?" I didn't apply for it. I didn't lie, nor do I wish to lie. This won't do. Officer Deng shook his head. Although we won't do anything to you because you don't have a residence permit, this is still rather important. Before you become a permanent resident here, if your child wants to study in a public kindergarten here, a residence permit is required. I don't even have a girlfriend. I smirk forcefully but politely again. Needless to say, I don't have children. Even for you as an individual, a residence permit is very important. As you know, it's very difficult to settle down in our city. Apart from special talents that we let in or people who take different paths, your residence permit, under normal circumstances, needs a few years. Anyway, it's a few years before you're qualified to apply for settlement. This is as important as paying for Social Security. Officer Deng added. This makes me feel the concern of an elder. I don't argue with him and nod. Yes, I'll get it done this week. Officer Deng smiled and said, opposite to your compound is a police station that can help you in the residential application. He then looks at me. By the way, in the past 2 to 3 months, an illegal religion has been illegally proselytizing in the city. They also use the classic multi-level marketing techniques. They use more modern terms like a fully automatic wishing machine to entice ordinary people to walk the path of evil. If you encounter them, make sure to be careful and remember to report it to us. Fully automatic wishing machine. My heart skips a beat at the mention of it. It sounds very similar to a vending machine. However, no one tried to proselytize to me back then. Okay. I don't dare to show any hesitation. I think for a second before answering. Thank you for your cooperation. Officer Deng doesn't say anything else as he smiles and puts away the tiny notebook in his hand. Just as he turns around halfway, he suddenly stops. By the way, I forgot something. For some reason, my eyes blur upon hearing that. It's a joint tenancy, right? Who's living in the other room? Officer Deng asks in a mellow voice. I close my eyes and calm my fluctuating emotions. It's a couple. A lady with the surname Sia and her overseas boyfriend. I see. Officer Deng nods. Remember to remind them to register their residence. All right. I watch as Officer Deng turns around. Only then do I see the officer standing behind him. His black hair and green eyes make him look like a celebrity. Green eyes? He's mixed blood? Or is he wearing colored contacts? I mumble inwardly. The green-eyed officer looks at me for a few seconds before suddenly smiling. That evil cult's means are more secretive than you can imagine. It's very hard to defend against them. At times, you won't need to pay any price to benefit from them, but believe me, you will definitely suffer immensely in the future. My heart palpitates when I hear this fellow. I recall the assassin potion and the leap of faith I obtained. I got it for 5 yuan. Could it really be that cult? What do they want from me after giving me superpowers? I understand. I'll make a report. I try hard not to show my fear as I reply to the green-eyed police officer. After sending them off, I return to the cramped guest room and sit down on the bed. I face the computer desk as I contemplate over what happened today. It doesn't make much sense. If that vending machine really was created by that cult, there's no need for them to hide. If they give every believer a bottle like the assassin beverage, then they can rule the world. Perhaps there are restrictions? But an organization that can obtain superpowers is definitely not simple. It's not something the likes of ordinary cults can achieve. But what's the point of giving me superpowers? To get a fighter? It's not like I'd go. If they dare to look for me, I'll dare to call the police. Money? I'm just from an ordinary family in a small city. Although my family has a place to stay, in order to provide for my other 2 siblings, my parents haven't managed to save up much money. It wasn't until Benson and I started working that our family situation improved slightly. After some thought, I pick up my phone and tap open WeChat. I find my brother, Benson Zhou, who works as a civil servant. B, did you offend anyone recently? I send a message. B is the nickname I gave Benson. It stems from the B in his name since he's balding. Who can I offend? Very quickly, Benson replies. I'm just a puny civil servant. I work cautiously every day, and I'm not a politician. I don't even serve the public at a window. Who can I offend? Before I can respond, he sends another message. What's wrong? What happened? I encountered something that I suspect to be fraud, but I don't have anything worth being scammed of, I reason. Benson replies one line at a time. No matter how poor a person is, there's still value in scamming them. Who doesn't have any friends or family? If you don't have money, can't you borrow it? Borrow from the people around you or on the internet. Get all kinds of microloans, and that adds up to a huge sum. Besides, you still have your body. Can't you sell your kidney, cornea, and blood? Besides, there are many female clubs nowadays. Who knows which customer would like your type? Stop scaring me. After sending this text, I quickly add, thankfully I didn't take the hit. I don't want Benson to worry about my drinking of the assassin beverage. I have to be careful. I need to immediately make a report to the police for any abnormalities around me. After chatting for a while, Benson reminds me, anyway, don't be greedy. Also, Sasa will be here before school starts. Remember to pick her up. Got it. I send him a popular emoji. It's a monocle-wearing emoji. After ending the conversation, I lose the urge to continue attempting the leap of faith. I sit by the bed, feeling a little frightened and worried. After a while, I subconsciously pick up my phone and look at WeChat and QQ. Among them, one of the QQ group chats has plenty of messages. It was a group that I built because we play horror and mystery games. It's called the Tarot Club and it's filled with other netizens. I take a quick scan at it and see someone named the Star send a message. Everyone, be careful. A mysterious cult has appeared. Chapter 1409 in Modern-Day 7 Cult? My attention is immediately drawn to this word. What has a cult got to do with us? A group member named Judgment asks. Mysterious? How mysterious? A group member named Justice asks. All kinds of messages appear in the group. It's rather overwhelming. I originally created this group when I was playing a horror, mystery game. I invited friends who were quite good at the game back then, and such games often contain mysticism-related elements. Therefore, after the game gradually lost its popularity, the group turned into a group that leaned towards discussing mysticism. Of course, in any chat group, daily interactions take up the majority of the content, except for sex-related chat groups. Amongst the members, the lady named Justice is most curious about mysticism. From her daily conversations, I can tell that her family background is quite good and she isn't too old. I think she's a student. After the group members are done asking, the star types, that cult likes to attack ordinary people, especially those who like mysticism. They will use all sorts of methods to allow you to obtain powers that exceed the limit of mortals. For example, the later it is at night, the more energetic you are. I already have this superpower. A group member named the Magician replies excitedly. She's also a girl. I remember her mentioning that she has a sizable income from writing novels on a certain green-colored website, and is considered one of the phenomenal writers there. However, from the way she makes all kinds of suggestive comments when she speaks, perhaps the green-colored website I'm aware of isn't the same website she was talking about. Compared to the day, I prefer the night, says a group member named the Moon. What is this fellow trying to say? Is he like a night owl, or is he hinting at something? I scratch my chin, unable to read the thoughts of the Moon. This fellow has always been like this. If you want to say that he has deep knowledge, he will post links regarding exquisite dolls in the group chat from time to time, asking everyone to help him at some price-slashing site. It's obvious that he's some type of shut-in. But to call him naive and immature, he often says profound things. Whether it's Chinese medicine, Western medicine, or even all kinds of relatively unknown medical knowledge, he gives off impressive vibes with his theories and examples, even if I can hardly understand it. Previously, he had diagnosed that one of our group members, the Hermit, had a rare disease. He successfully helped her recovery from an old ailment of hers, making everyone see him in a different light. The star ignores the Moon and replies to the Magician, "Then can you only sleep 2 hours a day?" "I can, but I can only maintain it for a week. I have to catch up on my sleep after that. Furthermore, my body will feel like it's been run over by a car, with tire tracks on my face." The Magician replies. The star continues, "Anyway, the cult will first allow you to obtain Superman-like powers. For example, you can remain extremely energetic despite sleeping for 2 hours every day. You can see all kinds of spirits, jump off tall buildings without suffering any damage, and control flames, etc., etc. Isn't this good?" Justice immediately replies. The Sun, Judgment, and Magician say, "Isn't this good?" +1, +1. I think for a moment and used my alternate account, the world. +1. The star sends an emoji. A price is always exacted for what fate bestows. I didn't say that. Lu Sun. The Magician replies immediately. I suspect this is a subconscious reflex of hers. Is there really a power that transcends the mortal world? Justice asks. Clearly, she had imagined that the star was joking. Without waiting for the star to respond, the Moon says, "There are too many things in the world that go beyond your imagination. It doesn't mean they don't exist just because you don't see them." The Sun immediately replies, "There's some mysticism that's real? Stop fooling kids." A group member named the Hanged Man sends an emoji. That's right, that's right. There are still young schooling children. One shouldn't talk about the strange and supernatural to children or make suggestive comments. The Magician echoes in all seriousness. The Sun replies, "I'm already in middle school. I'm more than 9 meters tall." When everyone sees the claim of being 9 meters tall, everyone falls silent. After a while, the star sends an emoji. In short, once one is bewitched by the cult and accepts their gift, they will definitely have to pay a huge price after joining them. I heard that some people went mad and got admitted into a mental hospital. Some of them committed suicide in various ways, dying rather hideously. Others transformed. Before he can finish, he suddenly stops. His profile picture indicates he has gone offline. What transformation? I ask with my alt, the world. My main account is the Fool, a mature man worthy of trust. Therefore, I can't ask questions casually. Could the star be held down by those cultists? The Magician gives a very imaginative idea. How could there be such a thing? I'm talking about a mysterious Kultfofnecht. Judgment is also a girl who always echoes the Magician. After making this joke, the star comes online again and says, "Fuck, there was a sudden blackout just now. I had no choice but to switch phones. Well, that's all from me. I have to head out. I have matters to tend to. Anyway, There's no such thing as a free lunch, so don't eat it. Don't be bewitched by the cult. Bye. As the star goes offline, I suddenly receive private messages. They come from the Hanged Man and the Hermit. Take note. I think the star might be a member of the cyber police. The star might be a policeman. Be careful what you say in the group chat. It's really possible to actually know about mysterious cults. I immediately reply to the two group members, it's fine. We're not a cult. It's not like I'm always the one making suggestive comments. Most importantly, when discussing international and domestic situations, I would stop it in time and send a picture that says, improper discussion about the imperial court is a crime that leads to death. Glancing at the group chat again, I quit QQ and once again start thinking about what I should do. After some thought, I'm still out of solutions. It's impossible for me to spit out the assassin beverage, nor can I vomit it out. I can only pretend that I don't know anything and ignore recruitment attempts of any cults. If I meet them, I'll immediately call the police. I force myself to focus on my savings and wallet. At the thought of this, I immediately free myself from my worries and begin to work. This is about being a slave of society. After confirming the flight details, the chauffeur, the hotel arrangements, and the pickup sign, I do a round of oral practice. By the time I'm done with all of that, it's already 10 in the evening. I feel hungry. I guess I'll go down and buy some snacks. I decide not to treat myself shabbily. As soon as I walk out of the guest room, I hear a quarrel from next door. Of course, it's mainly that lady named Sia Taz, who's shouting at her overseas boyfriend. Don't you get tired of that? Just as I'm about to lampoon, I realize that the quarrel is getting softer and softer. According to my experience, something inappropriate for minors will happen next. Although I'm not a minor, I'm single. After some thought, I return to my room, open the window, and jump onto the windowsill before jumping down with great familiarity. In the wind, my body feels light as if all my worries have been blown away. After landing safely, I heave a sigh of relief. I feel like I've completely grasped the power of assassin. The area outside the compound I live in remains lively late into the night. There are a few barbecue stalls, some selling fried rice, some selling stir-fried noodles. Some sell street food, like stewed meat, cold vegetables, duck necks, and crayfish. People who pass by will unknowingly sit down or come in front of a stall before sadly putting on a kilogram. Taking into consideration my little tummy, wait, my tummy seems to be missing. That tiny tummy I've worked so hard to get from all my meals is gone. This is a change brought about by assassin? I feel surprised once again. This gives me a lot more options besides the snacks. I can have barbecue food to celebrate. Forget it. I have to restrain myself. If an assassin is 170 centimeters tall, but ends up being 100 kilograms, wouldn't my target end breaking out into a laughing fit when they see me? I slowly exhale and decide to go to the 24-hour convenience store. To the left is a Family Mart. To the right is Lawson. It's very unfriendly for an indecisive consumer like me. I heard that Lawson has launched a few new types of ice cream recently. I recall and turn to the right. Just as I enter Lawson, my eyes light up as I see a gorgeous woman. Chapter 1410. In modern-day 8 as an international metropolitan city, there are definitely countless beauties dressed fashionably out on the streets. Even if I don't pay attention to them, I would often find women that catch my attention. But even so, this person that's inside Lawson is a rare gem. I can't help but steal another look after seeing her. Her brown-dyed hair cascades down like a waterfall, and two crystal-like accessories hang from her earlobes. Her eyes sparkle, looking as clear and beautiful as the eyes of deers in forests. She has plenty of charisma. Out of courtesy and habitual shyness, I tear my eyes away from the girl and walk past her to the area where the fridge is. During this process, I can't help but turn around to take a few more looks, but I suppress my actions to avoid offending her. Which ice cream should I buy? I gaze at the transparent sliding door of the cool box and fall into deep thought. Recently, the more popular ones are Fat Crabs, Iron Cauldron Stew. Taking into account my successful weight loss, and my need to prevent any rebounds, as well as my tight financial situation at the end of the month, I ultimately chose fat crabs. Then, I go to the neighboring room to get a bottle of chilled CR and a packet of cucumber-flavored potato chips. All three combined form my supper for the night. If it was the beginning of the month, I definitely would have bought more. I'll keep them at home and eat them when there's a need. I don't have to go downstairs every time, but there's no need to be so carefree with my expenses now. Xiao Huang had once said, "Don't let trivialities take up your most important liquidity." Without any hesitation, I take my snacks and walk to the counter to stand in line to settle the bill. At this moment, I suddenly smell a faint fragrance. In the next second, I turn my head and see the gorgeous beauty walk past 2 rows of shelves. She smiles and says with her eyes shimmering, "Can I add you on WeChat?" I arch my arms a little and express my puzzlement in my speech and pose. I've never had girls ask me for my contact details all my life. That's right. The beauty nods happily and says with a smile, "Your looks and temperament matches my taste. I want to get to know you." If she were to praise me for being handsome or good-looking, I definitely wouldn't have believed her. However, it's not impossible that my looks and temperament matches her tastes. Maybe she likes my type, right? For a moment, I understand what it means to be overwhelmed and flattered. In the next second, I become more wary. Could it be some multi-level marketing scheme? Or some honey trap? As an aficionado of legal shows, a fan of the legal report of many years, I am instinctively wary of good things falling into my lap. As I hesitate, the eyes of that beautiful woman standing in front of me fogs up. It makes me feel ashamed and guilty. Perhaps it's not some multi-level marketing or honey trap. Even if it is, she's just adding me on WeChat. It won't be a problem if I pay more attention in the future. I think for a moment and hurriedly say, "All right." I turn around and place the bottle of CR on the counter before taking out my phone from my pocket. However, when I look at that girl again, she has already disappeared. It's not as if I can't see her. I can still see instances of her back appearing through the cracks of the shelves. What about appreciating my looks and temperament? How did you have a change of heart so quickly? Just as this thought flashes through my mind, I heard a chime. The door of the convenience store opens automatically, and a figure walks in. It's Officer Deng, who had checked on my residence permit in the evening, but he has already changed into casual wear. He walks to the front desk and tugs at the bottom of his black jacket's bottom. He says to the staff, "A cup of coffee." As he speaks, Officer Deng turns to look at me. "Are you footing your bill?" Before he can finish, he pinches his forehead. You are Zhou Mingrui, Officer Deng. "We just met this evening," I reply with a smile. At that moment, from the corner of my eye, I catch the woman leaving the convenience store. She gave up striking up a conversation with me and ran off in a hurry because she saw Officer Deng? Is she really involved in multi-level marketing or pulling a honey trap? Feeling regretful and puzzled, I hand over the items in my hand to the shop assistant and say without minding, "Give Officer Deng his coffee first." The shop assistant spends some time making the coffee before giving it to Officer Deng. He gives me a friendly smile and heads out with the cup in hand. After taking a few steps, he stops and says with a self-deprecating smile, "I forgot to remind you that the cult will use all kinds of means to approach the target. Be careful." Suddenly, I am aware of a possibility. Could that beauty from before be from that cult? She hit on me because I drank the assassin beverage and became their target? This method really makes it impossible to guard against. They actually used a honey trap. I'm alarmed. With Officer Deng about to turn around and leave the convenience store, I rush forward and say to him, "Just now, a woman wanted to add me on WeChat." Officer Deng doesn't laugh at me. He asks very formally, "What does she look like?" "Very beautiful, more beautiful than many celebrities." I give a simple description and conclude, "I don't think I have the charm to make a beauty hit on me." Not bad. Many victims only get deceived because they feel that they are very charming, says Officer Deng with a smile. "We will track and investigate this. As for you, you should just try your best. Try not to speak to strangers as depicted in television dramas. Speaking is fine, just don't establish more connections." My heart warms as I nod vigorously. All right. After seeing Officer Deng leave, I return to the counter to settle the bill. I take the snacks and walk to the entrance of my residential compound. Along the way, after passing the barbecue stall, the strong fragrance inundates my nostrils again. It tempts me to sit down and order a pile of food. I sweep a glance, and I see a group of gangsters. They're sitting on simple plastic stools at the barbecue stall, waiting for the food to be cooked. Their hair is dyed in all sorts of colors, and it's obvious that they're punks following the scene subculture. If it were in the past, I definitely would have upped my pace and widened my distance to avoid any unnecessary conflicts. But now, I'm looking forward to them making things difficult for me. I want them to have a good taste of an assassin's prowess. Just then, one of the hoodlums glances at me and stands up abruptly. Holding a stack of paper, he jogs towards me. I'm thrilled and begin to imagine what pose I should put on later. The charred yellow-eyebrowed hoodlum quickly comes in front of me and says, "Hi there, perhaps you would be interested in dream tutoring classes?" Dream tutoring classes? This development is completely different from what I expected. As he speaks, the hoodlum hands a flyer to me. Our dream tutoring classes covers many topics. Even if you're already working, you can learn things from the courses to improve yourselves and even switch careers. I blankly receive the flyer and subconsciously ask, "Are you a tutor?" "Yes, I'm a foreign language teacher." The hoodlum smiles arrogantly. "My surname is Da." Before he can finish his sentence, a few of the hoodlums shout, "Danny, the food is ready. It's time to dig in." The hoodlum in front of me turns around and flips his middle finger before running back. I shake my head in disappointment and wrap my snacks in the flyer before entering my compound and return to my rented apartment building. As this place is old, there are a few lamps along the stairs that are out. Some of the floors are dark. I have to take out my cell phones to turn on the flashlight function before I can see where I'm placing my feet clearly. The surroundings are very quiet. My phone suddenly flashes a few times, turning extremely dim. At the same time, I feel a cold wind blow past me. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.